Chapter 325. When Xiaoyu arrived at the front hall, she put on the airs of the Wang Fu's housekeeper. She raised her chin high and looked askance at old madam and second madam with a straight face. "Is this the family Qin girl you're looking for?" Old madam was wearing a cotton-padded jacket that was neither new nor old, and a brown cotton cloak was draped over her shoulders. When she saw Xiaoyu, who was dressed in brocade and had an arrogant expression on his face, she immediately stood up and curtsied. "This must be the chief steward. This old one specially came to pick up my granddaughter." Second madam supported old madam on the side and also bowed. Xiaoyu said arrogantly, "Do you think this is still your territory in the Dian dynasty? This is the capital, Prince Zhongshuan's residence. Your family Qin is my Wang Ye's enemy. Your girl came to Wang Ye's residence to repay a debt. You want to go back? How can it be so simple?" Old madam's heart skipped a beat when she heard this. The thing she was most worried about had happened. Now, they were already in the capital of Dezhou. With Pang Zhao's status, they were meat on the chopping block. If Pang Zhao wanted to take revenge, not to mention robbing a Qin Yining, even if she slaughtered their entire family, no one would say a word. The more old madam thought about it, the more scared she became. Her body couldn't help but tremble. Now, Qin Huayuan's whereabouts were unknown. She didn't know if he was dead or alive. If her eldest son was gone, even if she still had her second and third son, it was still unknown whether the family Qin business could be revived. Now, they provoked this evil fetus. Would they still be able to live peacefully in the future? This damned girl is too useless. Didn't she coax Pang Zhishi well in the past? Why did she want to take revenge now? Old madam cursed in her heart. She couldn't help sweating profusely and almost shed tears. Just as her mind was in a mess, second madam, who was holding her hand, gently pinched the back of her hand. Old madam was brought back to her senses by the slight pain. She suddenly thought of the purpose of her visit today and felt even more uncertain. However, he still had to bite the bullet and say it. Otherwise, his family would have no way to survive. This is not appropriate. Our family's sister Yi is a proper young miss. How can you, Wang Yi, bring her back to the residence as you please? Even if there is some enmity between us, it's fine to take revenge in person. You can't humiliate a girl like this. Madame Dowager wiped the sweat off her forehead with her sleeve and said in a trembling voice, "Today, we must take Sister Yi away. Otherwise, even if we don't say anything, your Majesty won't agree." Xiaoyu carefully observed old madam's expression. He realized that the old woman's concern for her granddaughter was almost non-existent. Just now, when she heard Wang Yi talk about revenge, she even had a look of resentment. It was really sad to have such a grandmother. The old madam's nervousness and fear seemed to be directed at something else. When he heard her say, "Your Majesty won't agree," Xiaoyu was very suspicious and pretended to be angry. He said in a low voice, "You have such a big tone. You are just defeated soldiers who surrendered. You actually want to be big here. Your Majesty won't agree. Your Majesty doesn't even know who you are. Don't use this kind of excuse to scare people." Old madam saw that the Wang estate's housekeeper was actually so arrogant. She had never suffered such a loss before. Moreover, if they couldn't take Qin Yining away today, they wouldn't be able to keep their lives. Therefore, old madam put away her worry and fear and said angrily, "Don't be too rampant. Your Majesty will select the concubine next year. I have already signed up our family sister Yi. Now, her name has already been submitted. If you don't let her go now, do you want to wait for your family's Wang Yi and your Majesty to snatch her away?" "What? Select concubine?" Xiaoyu's expression didn't change, but her heart was in a perilous situation. This old madam didn't care much about her own granddaughter, but she didn't hold back when she used her. Old madam's words stunned Bing Tang, Ji Yun, and Qiu Lu who came with her. The three of them traveled together and only entered the city together when they met the family Qin at the entrance of the capital. At that time, Old Madam, Second Old Master, and Third Old Master were covered in filth and were in a sorry state. It seemed that they weren't doing as well as the three girls. Ji Yun, Bing Tang, and Qiu Lu were secretly guessing what these people had experienced on the road. Now, they hadn't found out any useful information. Old Madam actually sold Qin Yining for her family's glory and wealth. Since the words had already been spoken, Old Madam's heart also calmed down. Second Old Madam also heaved a sigh of relief and politely said to Xiaoyu, Sister Yi is going to be selected to serve your majesty. It's not appropriate for her to stay in your residence now. I think that even Prince Zhongshuan wouldn't fight with your majesty over a woman, right? We are all your majesty's subjects, so loyalty is the most important. Old steward, please bring Sister Yi out so that we can bring her back and properly educate her, so that she won't be flustered when serving your majesty in the future. Xiaoyu was already extremely displeased with the two women in front of her. The tone of their words showed that they didn't treat Qin Yining as a person at all. Instead, they treated her as a bargaining chip to achieve their goal. Xiaoyu didn't want to argue with them. She wanted to quickly find out the reason, so she waved her hand as if she was shooing away flies and said, Don't even think about it. You're going to be selected. There are so many women in the residence, so you can just send any one of them. Miss Qin was snatched by our Wang Yi, so she's Wang Ye's. Don't even think about taking her away. Could it be that your Wang Yi even dares to snatch your majesty's woman? Old Madam asked loudly. Xiaoyu snorted and said, Don't put such a big hat on my Wang Ye's head. This Miss Qin isn't participating in the selection right now, so she's not one of your majesty's people, right? Old Madam choked. For a moment, the corners of her mouth opened and closed. She didn't know how to respond. This steward was too difficult to deal with outside. Second Old Madam helped Old Madam sit down on a round-backed chair. She also sat on the side and said, If you don't call Sister Yi out, the two of us won't leave. Presumably, Prince Zhongshuan's residence won't make things difficult for two women, right? That's right. If you don't hand over Sister Yi, we won't leave. Old Madam came back to her senses and also shouted. Really? When you can't reason with them, you start to act shamelessly. Are you worthy of being the madams of a large family? You're really bringing shame to your surname Qin. Xiaoyu waved his hand as if he was shooing away mosquitoes. He said impatiently, If you want to wait, then do as you please. These three maidservants will follow me. Yes. Ji Yun, Bing Tang, and Qiu Lu bowed together and were about to follow Xiaoyu. Old Madam said, These three maidservants are my family Qin's people. Why? Your Wang Yi snatched a young miss from my family Qin's, and you also want to send your maidservants over. Xiaoyu didn't want to quarrel with women and children as it would bring shame to him. He deliberately provoked Old Madam and Second Madam to talk in order to find out more information. Now that the conversation couldn't continue, he didn't want to pay more attention to them. He pretended that he didn't hear them and quickly walked away with the three maidservants. Old Madam and Second Madam stayed in the hall. Although they couldn't see any servants around them, there were people guarding the door and the back corridor. After they calmed down, the two realized how impulsive they were to quarrel with the housekeeper of the Wangfu. Later, the people of the Wangfu wouldn't make things difficult for them, right? Xiaoyu rushed to Su Shui Garden with Ji Yun, Bing Tang, and Qiu Lu. Qin Yining was already wearing a cloak and waiting in the corridor. When he saw the three people, he immediately walked down the stairs and hugged them. Great! This is great! You're all fine. Miss. We knew you were still alive. That's great. I thought I would never see you again. The four girls hugged each other. At first, they laughed, but then they began to cry bitterly. Xian Yun and Lian Xiaozhou, who were at the side, were stunned. Qin Yining finally calmed down. He wiped his tears and carefully examined the three of them. When he saw that they were only a little thinner and weren't injured, he finally relaxed. That day, the group was separated. Were you traveling with old madam and the others? Bing Tang shook his head. We'll talk to you about this in detail later. Right now, there's something more important. That's right. Xiaoyu said, Miss Qin, old madam and second madam of your Wangfu are here to take you back. They said that your majesty has already turned the year and signed you up for the selection. They want to take you back to properly serve your majesty. I've already warned them, but they're determined to take you back. Right now, the two of them are eating tea in the front. They're not even afraid of Wang Yi anymore. When Qin Yining heard this, he felt like he was struck by lightning. His ears were buzzing. You're saying that my grandmother wants to send me into the palace? Xiaoyu nodded. Really? This was really unexpected, but within reason. Since her father was separated from old madam and the others, old madam would definitely find a way out for the stability of the family Qin. Sending a daughter into the palace was indeed a way to stabilize the family Qin's future. No, this idea might not have come from old madam. It was more likely the result of a discussion among all the family Qin members. It was really a good plan. They wanted to squeeze her dry and use her to the end before giving up. Seeing Qin Yining's expression flickering, Bing Tang said worriedly, Miss, don't be angry. Maybe things will take a turn for the better. That's right, Mississippi, Chiu Lu also tried to persuade her. Qin Yining took a deep breath. After the anger and panic just now, she forced herself to calm down and said, I'll go and meet them later. Xiaoyu said, why don't we wait for Wang Yi to come back and meet them? It won't be too late. After all, they were the elders in the family. Qin Yining would probably be at a disadvantage in front of them. Qin Yining thought for a moment. That's fine. If we're going to put on an act, we have to go all the way. Since I was kidnapped, then I shouldn't be too free. So you're saying that Miss wasn't kidnapped? Ji Yun asked with a smile. Xian Yun, who was at the side, held Ji Yun's hand and said with a smile, Wang Yi ordered both of us around for Mississippi. Do you think Wang Yi will mistreat Miss? Ji Yun and Xian Yun looked at each other. They couldn't help but laugh mockingly. Qin Yining's face turned red from their laughter. Even her anger dissipated. She turned around and held Lian Xiaozhou's hand. She introduced Bing Tang, Chiu Lu, and Ji Yun to them. After thanking Xiaoyu, she went into the room with the three people who she hadn't seen for a long time to talk about what happened after they parted. After lunch, Qin Yining went to sleep before Pang Xiao returned to the residence. Chapter 326. Wang Yi, don't be angry. Xiaoyu was really subdued by Pang Xiao's outburst of anger. As an aide, she must know the temperament of the master like the back of her hand. Xiaoyu knew that Pang Xiao was not as cold and violent as others thought. On the contrary, Pang Xiao was a very shrewd person. This could be seen from how he could always meet different people with the most appropriate appearance. To put it bluntly, whether it was his violent and perverse nature, his indifference and alienation, or his gentleness and friendliness, it was rarely because of his own emotional needs, but because of the situation and the needs of those people. And now, pointing at the front hall and cursing in anger, it could be seen that Pang Xiao was really angry. For a person who was good at enduring and rarely got angry to lose control of his emotions because of such a thing, it was enough to see the position of the family Qin girl in Pang Xiao's heart. Pang Xiao was so angry that his face and ears turned red. He pointed at the front hall and cursed, "That old hag, I knew she was not a good person." Back in the Yen dynasty, she treated Sister Yi like an outsider, as if Sister Yi was not her biological granddaughter. Now that the country has been destroyed, she still doesn't stop. She even schemed against Sister Yi. That old hag, this king will kill her and be done with it. In anger, he pulled out the sword hanging on the wall and rushed out. "Wang Yi, you can't do that. Wang Yi." Xiaoyu was scared silly as he saw this. He stretched out his arms like an old hen, and tried to stop Pang Xiao. However, Pang Xiao was tall and strong. Moreover, his martial strength was outstanding. So, how could Xiaoyu block him? Xiaoyu stretched her neck and shouted, "Someone come, someone come." Huzi, who was outside the room, heard the noise and hurried in. He saw Pang Xiao and Xiaoyu playing a game of eagle catching chicks. Pang Xiao dashed left and right with his sword, but was stopped by the old hen. He could not help but be stunned. He was stunned for a moment before he went forward to stop them. "Wang Yi, you can't do that. You are still in danger. Your Majesty has focused on recruiting the family Qin. Now that your Majesty has not made arrangements, if you kill the family Qin's matriarch first, the consequences will be unimaginable." Xiaoyu was anxious and sweaty as she tried her best to persuade him. At this moment, Pang Xiao regained his rationality. He knew that Xiaoyu was right. He was walking on thin ice now. If he really did something to the family Qin's matriarch, he did not know what Li Qitian would do. Seeing that Pang Xiao finally stopped moving, Xiaoyu and Huzi both breathed a sigh of relief. Pang Xiao threw the sword aside and pondered for a moment with a sullen face. He said, "This matter is not simple. Previously, our people went to investigate. After the family Qin's matriarch was scattered, they did not come back with your Majesty's team. Instead, they came back alone. When they entered the city, the family Qin's matriarch and the others were dressed shabbily, no different from beggars. I ordered people to investigate, but did not find out what they had experienced. Now that Grand Tutor Qin and his wife are missing, Matriarch Qin suddenly wants to send Sister Yi to the consort selection after such a bleak situation." At this point, Pang Xiao's eyes showed that he was thinking. Xiaoyu also frowned and said, "Although I don't know the reason behind it, I feel that it is very strange when I connect the dots." "Yes." Huzi also said, "That Matriarch Qin is not a strong-willed person. Today, she actually dared to take her daughter-in-law to stay in our mansion and not leave. She is not afraid of facing Wang Yi. Could it be that someone is backing her up? Otherwise, where did she get the courage to do this?" Huzi's words reminded Pang Xiao and Xiaoyu. The two of them looked at each other. Xiaoyu patted Huzi's shoulder and said, "As expected, heroes come from the young." "Yes, what you said is very likely." Huzi scratched his head and smiled honestly. "I'm just guessing casually. It's not accurate." "Your guess is very reasonable." Pang Xiao thought for a moment and said, "How about this? I'll take Sister Yi to have a look and find out the situation." "That's good. Miss Qin is extremely smart. After all, they are grandfather and grandson, so they can talk freely. Perhaps Miss Qin can find out useful information." Pang Xiao ordered someone to call Qin Yining out. After he was dressed properly, he waited at the Chuehua gate. Not long after, he saw Qin Yining slowly walk over accompanied by Ji Yun. Qin Yining was wearing an old cotton-padded jacket and a honey-colored cotton-padded cloak. Her long hair was tied up in a loose bun. She didn't wear any jewelry or makeup. She was dressed very simply. Pang Xiao smiled and said, "Where did you find this old jacket?" "I asked Xian Yun to help me find it. My grandmother is very snobbish. If I dress a little better, she will think that I weigh a lot in front of you. This is simpler, and the impact on her will be greater. Pang Xiao nodded with a smile and said, later, you can ask in detail why they suddenly asked you to participate in the selection. Qin Yining nodded slightly and said with a bitter smile, actually, I know without asking in detail. Now that my father is missing, the family has no backbone. It's possible that the old madam wants to use me to exchange for a future for the family. It's just that I don't know where they are so confident that if I participate in the selection, I will definitely be selected. Moreover, I'm not very talented or beautiful. If I enter the palace, I might not be favored at all. The strength that I can contribute to the family is also very limited. They would rather offend you and forcefully send me into the palace. Moreover, they might not get much in return. I always feel that their method is not reliable and does not conform to the old madam's usual style. Pang Xiao shook his head. You are too modest. What's not very talented or beautiful? He was a man and understood a man's mentality the best. If Qin Yining can enter the palace, even if your majesty doesn't really love her, she will definitely become a favored concubine due to her liking for beautiful things. Moreover, with her intelligence, if she works hard in the palace, no one will be able to do anything to her. Her meteoric rise will be just around the corner. For a moment, Pang Xiao even felt that only the most honorable position in the world was worthy of her. However, she must be his and could only be his. As the two talked, they arrived at the front courtyard. Pang Xiao squeezed her hand that was hidden under the cloak. Then, his face turned cold and he stepped on the stairs first. Qin Yining and Ji Yun took 2 steps back and timidly followed Pang Xiao into the main hall. Old Madam and Second Madam's waists were already sore from sitting. They ate too much tea and used the latrine twice. They also ate some snacks for lunch to fill their stomachs. However, they were impatient from waiting. Just as the two were complaining in a low voice, the main door opened and Pang Xiao entered first. Compared to when he was in the Dying Court, this person who was dressed in brocade and had a disdainful expression made people feel more fearful. Old Madam and Second Madam both stood up and stood to the side. Pang Xiao didn't look sideways and didn't even bother to look at the two. He went straight to the main seat and sat down. He said coldly, I heard that you two are quite bold to dare to make a scene in my Wang estate. You said that you won't leave until you hand over the person and that you will let your majesty decide. Old Madam was so scared that her face turned pale. She shook her head repeatedly. No such thing. We are in Wang Ye's estate. How would we dare to behave atrociously? Perhaps there is some misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? Pang Xiao sneered. Then the matter of letting this king's maidservant participate in the consort selection is also a misunderstanding. Maidservant? Old Madam was very surprised. Pang Xiao snorted. The daughter of the enemy is being a maidservant in this king's estate to repay the blood debt that you two owed. Don't tell me that she has been wronged. If she doesn't become a maidservant, do you think that your granddaughter is a noble and wants to be a Wang Fei? This sentence made Old Madam and Second Madam so embarrassed that their faces and ears turned red. They did have some fantasies. If Qin Yining could charm Pang Xiao and make Pang Xiao treat Qin Yining as well as he did in Dian, then the family Qin would also be able to receive some care from Pang Xiao. Even if Qin Yining was sent to the palace, Pang Xiao would pay less attention and wouldn't make things difficult for the family Qin, right? But now, this fantasy had been completely shattered. When the family Qin came to the capital, they absolutely had no relatives and no foundation. Now, they didn't dare to count on Pang Xiao to be their backer. Their future days would probably be difficult. Old Madam turned to look at Qin Yining and said in a low voice, You lass, did you not serve Wang Yi well? Is that why Wang Yi is angry? This sentence made everyone present frown. Even Second Madam, who came with old madam, felt that it was extremely inappropriate. By asking this, did she think that Qin Yining was Pang Zhao's concubine? Qin Yining's face darkened. Ever since the disaster and starvation, she no longer had any illusions about old madam's character. Now, she loathed her to the extreme and made up her mind to treat her as an outsider in the future. Therefore, Qin Yining said without any trace of politeness, "Old madam is so awe-inspiring. Wretched lass, you still dare to talk back in front of Wang Yi." Qin Yining looked coldly at old madam and said in a cold voice, "Old madam is getting old, and her mind is becoming more and more muddled. Regardless of whether I serve Wang Yi as a maidservant or enter the palace to serve His Majesty in the consort selection, old madam's goal is to hope that I can help the family. Is it really good for you to anger me now?" Old madam came to her senses with just one sentence, and her expression immediately turned ugly. Just now, she did deliberately step on Qin Yining because she wanted to maintain her status and regain some face. Second madam secretly thought that old madam was ignorant and said, "So, Sister Yi has already agreed to participate in the consort selection. Then you should resign from Wang Yi now. The consort selection will be held in the coming year, and we should prepare well." As second madam spoke, her eyes couldn't help but glance in Pang Zhao's direction. When she saw that Pang Zhao was only focused on eating tea and didn't pay attention to them at all, she sighed in relief. Qin Yining said, "You want me to participate in the consort selection?" "Sure, but you have to tell me whose idea it was first. After our family was separated, how did you separate from my father? Where are my parents now?" Old madam and second madam looked at each other, and second madam said, "Sister Yi, we'll talk about this when you return with us. Now is not the place to talk. If you don't explain it clearly, I won't go with you. Moreover, it's not up to me to decide whether I stay or go." "You won't go?" Old madam raised her voice again. "If you don't want to go, don't tell me you're willing to lower yourself and serve men here." Qin Yining stared coldly at old madam. If this person wasn't her father's mother, she really wanted to kick her out of the door. However, Pang Zhao had already made a move. The lid of clear skies after a rain shattered at old madam's feet in the next moment. Chapter 327. How could old madam have thought that Pang Zhao would actually want to hit her? She was already so old. If she was really hid in the Wangfu, how could she go out and meet people? "You can't hit me." Old madam stared at the servants of the Wangfu who had rushed into the antechamber and shouted fiercely, "I'm the old lord of the Marquis of Anping's Fu. Let's see who dares to hit me." Although her voice was loud and clear, her panicked appearance of repeatedly retreating had already revealed her panic and fear. Second madam was also abnormally nervous. She opened her arms to protect old madam behind her and looked at Qin Yining with a pleading gaze. Qin Yining frowned and didn't immediately speak. Su Weiji had already heard about old madam's temperament from Xiaoyu. She was very displeased with this kind of person who only cared about personal gains. She ridiculed, "Marquis of Anping. I've never heard of him. Which dynasty's marquis is he?" "You." Old madam choked and almost couldn't breathe. But the fear in her heart deepened. Yes, the Dayan country was destroyed. Her most promising son's life and death were unknown. She could no longer show off in front of Prince Zhongshuan. Old madam was somewhat regretful. She shouldn't have been so impolite to Qin Yining just for a moment of pleasure. Otherwise, the situation wouldn't have become so embarrassing. "What are you waiting for? Drag her out." Pang Zhao impatiently waved his hand. Su Weiji and Xiaoyu were somewhat hesitant at this time. With Pang Zhao's current status and situation, he really shouldn't face old madam directly. However, Wang Yi was currently in a fit of anger. If they tried to persuade Wang Yi, it would make others laugh at Wang Yi. It would make him seem like he was afraid of an old woman. While the two of them were hesitating, the servants came forward and dragged the Dowager Duchess out of the room. No, no. Old Madam was extremely scared. She wasn't just afraid of pain. Most importantly, she was afraid of losing face. She had always been the one to slap others. When had others ever slapped her? She was already so old. If she was dragged out to be slapped because she offended an influential person, she would really lose all her dignity for the rest of her life. Qin Yining helplessly sighed when she saw old Madam's terrified appearance. Although she was extremely disgusted with old Madam, from Pang Zhao's point of view, punishing old Madam at this time wasn't a wise move. Pang Zhao's matter. Pang Zhao. 2. Seeing Qin Yining plead for leniency, old Madam and second Madam were both relieved. Su Weiji and Xia Yu looked at Qin Yining at the same time. They understood her intention. They secretly praised and rejoiced. Fortunately, Qin Yining was a sensible person. Otherwise, if Wang Yi hit her in a rage, there would be more trouble in the future. How could Pang Zhao not understand Qin Yining's intention? However, as a man, he couldn't stand up for his beloved woman when she was wronged. This feeling was really unbearable. He wasn't a spineless person who hid behind a woman. As a person who was used to controlling the overall situation, he had to be restrained by reality like this. It was really unbearable. Pang Zhao's face darkened. He really wanted to pull Qin Yining up and hold her in his arms to comfort her. Unfortunately, in front of outsiders, he had to put on a show. He could only put on a gloomy face and said coldly and impatiently, "What's your identity? You can't even protect yourself. What qualifications do you have to plead for leniency?" Qin Yining lowered her head and didn't say a word. Her weak and thin figure and her clothes that couldn't be considered luxurious reminded old Madam and second Madam again that Qin Yining had fallen out of favor. Pang Zhao couldn't dote on her like before. However, she was willing to plead for old Madam and was also reprimanded by Pang Zhao. This made old Madam and second Madam feel much better and less resentful towards her. Pang Zhao called Su Weiji over and whispered a few words in his ear. Su Weiji was stunned for a moment and then nodded. He turned around and said a few words to Huzi. Huzi's eyes lit up when he heard this. He hurriedly retreated. Then Pang Zhao still ordered, "Why are you still in a daze? Are you all deaf? Why don't you take this old witch out and slap her for insulting this king?" "Yes." Su Weiji immediately called the servants forward. They pulled old Madam and second Madam and pushed them out of the front hall. This time, old Madam was really scared. She begged for mercy, but Pang Zhao was indifferent. In a moment of desperation, old Madam acted like a shrew again. She scolded Pang Zhao loudly and cursed the deceased ancestors of the Pang family, especially the female elders of the Pang family. Her words were so vulgar that the servant who was pulling old Madam couldn't bear to listen anymore. She secretly pinched old Madam a few times. Su Weiji and Xia Yu walked at the back. The more they listened, the more indignant they became. How could a good girl like Qin Yining, who was smart and knowledgeable, have such a shrew for a grandmother? Was this the meaning of "good bamboo shoots come out of bad bamboo"? Old Madam was already so difficult to deal with. They didn't know what Wang Ye's future father-in-law would be like. Old Madam's curses extended from the front hall to the outside of the mansion. When Su Weiji and Xia Yu ordered the servants to throw old Madam and second Madam out of the door, old Madam still couldn't react. Was Pang Zhao planning to slap her in front of the mansion? Just as she thought this, she saw Xia Yu and Su Weiji turn around and go back. Old Madam immediately felt very proud. She fiercely spat and said, "Ignorant brat. I knew you were just making a ruckus. If you have the ability, you can really touch my finger." When my son comes back, he will definitely punish you. Old madam, old madam. Second madam pulled old madam's arm and tried to drag her away. Things had turned out like this, and it was inseparable from old madam's attitude. They were driven out before they could even say the news that they wanted to tell Qin Yining. Fortunately, Prince Zhongshuan was just scaring old madam. Now, he should stop while he was ahead. How could he still have any tolerance when making a scene in front of the Wangfu? Just as they were thinking this, the two suddenly heard a low dog bark. Immediately, they saw a black shadow come out from the crack of the mansion's corner door. Looking at the source of the sound, it was actually a robust big black dog with shiny fur. That big dog stared at the two and barked non-stop. Its mouth was open and saliva was dripping down, as if it had been starved for many days. Old madam and second madam were so scared that their bodies stiffened. But the big black dog didn't care about the two's panic and rushed over while barking. "Ah! Help!" Old madam couldn't care about anything else. She turned around and ran. Second madam also ran all the way. She pulled old madam's hand and ran to the carriage with great effort. She climbed into the carriage and urged the coachman to leave without waiting for them to sit down. The dog's barking continued until it chased them down a street. Then, as if tired, the black dog turned around and left. Huzi squatted in front of the mansion. Seeing Big Black return, he hurriedly fed him a few mouthfuls of jerky and praised, "Big Black, well done. That old hag is very arrogant. She needs to be taught a lesson." After Dahe finished the jerky with satisfaction, Huzi patted its head with a smile and said, "Come on, let's go back." Big Black barked a few times and followed Huzi to the front hall. Qin Yining was holding Big White and stroking the little white dog's fur with a worried expression. As if it could sense Qin Yining's low mood, Big White nestled in Qin Yining's arms obediently and only wagged his little tail. Pang Xiao stood by the window with his hands clasped behind his back. After a long while, he suppressed the anger that was about to explode in his heart and said, "You go back. Where can you go back? Stay in the guest house with those inhuman things. You might as well ignore them. Let's see what they dare to do." Selection. There are so many girls in the family and they didn't send them. Are you the only daughter in the family? I think these people are shameless. They won't give up until they use you to their fullest potential. How can I ignore them? I stayed here with you because everyone knew that you were the one who kidnapped me. I had no other choice. But now, the Dowager Duchess has come to talk about the selection. If I continue to stay, I'll be harming you. You don't have to be afraid. I can protect you. Pang Xiao suddenly turned around. The flames in his eyes seemed to be able to burn people to ashes. Qin Yining shook his head and said, "I know you can protect me. But think about it. How many people are out there waiting to catch you? Your Majesty's suspicion of you hasn't changed. You destroyed the Dian for him, but he didn't even give you a proper reward. He's also constantly trying to sow discord between you and North placating Marquis. You're already treading on thin ice. How can I add to your troubles? Let's not talk about other things. You already know that I'm the girl that the family is going to send to participate in the selection. If you still hold on to me and don't let me go, isn't that clearly going against your superiors? If someone with ulterior motives catches you and reports you to the Emperor, think about it. How many mouths do you have to explain yourself clearly?" Pang Xiao understood what Qin Yining said. But it was precisely because he understood and didn't have a definite solution at the moment that Pang Xiao felt angry. You really intend to participate in the selection?" Pang Xiao strode to Qin Yining and held her weak shoulders with both hands. "Qin Yining, I won't allow it. You can only be mine. Do you hear me? This was the first time that Pang Xiao had called her name so seriously. It could even be said that he was furious. His eyes were burning with fire, as if he wanted to burn both of them to ashes. Qin Yining patted Pang Xiao's hand comfortingly and nodded. I've been yours for a long time. How can I serve others? Her gentleness extinguished Pang Xiao's anger. Pang Xiao really didn't have confidence. Because he was in a chaotic situation, he was embarrassed to say that he could immediately give Qin Yining a life of luxury and prosperity. The only thing he could guarantee was his sincerity. Any woman who was a little bit more realistic would not consider him the husband that Your Majesty is afraid of at this moment. And if she served Your Majesty, with her ability, she would definitely be able to achieve a meteoric rise. But she only has him in mind. Chapter 328. Qin Yining raised her head and endured his storm-like kisses. She felt that his strong arms were about to break her waist. She could hear Pang Xiao's heavy breathing, like that of a trapped beast. She could only stretch out her arms and wrap them around his neck, her fingers lingering in his hair to comfort him. Pang Xiao's kisses gradually became slower and gentler, as if he was apologizing for his rough behavior just now. He used the tip of his tongue to trace the red and swollen lips that he had ravaged. When their lips parted, he cherished her in his arms. Sister Yi, you're so good. I've long decided that you're mine. If someone suddenly told me that I can't have you in my future, I'm afraid that I would do something that I can't control. Qin Yining leaned on Pang Xiao's shoulder and rubbed against him like a well-behaved cat. That won't happen. Believe me, I can solve this problem. Let me think of a way first. Okay. I know you're smart and will definitely think of a way. Just tell me what you need me to do. I'll definitely cooperate with you. His cautiousness made Qin Yining feel both warm and sad. He was in such a difficult situation right now. She had to deal with her own problems well and not make him worry. Wang Yi, Wang Yi. Huzi's voice suddenly came from outside the closed door. Your Majesty has arrived. Quickly prepare to receive him. Qin Yining was stunned. She hurriedly withdrew from Pang Xiao's arms and looked left and right for a place to hide. Pang Xiao pointed to the folding screen at the side. Qin Yining understood and immediately ran behind the folding screen made of black mahogany. She had just stood there when she heard a burst of hearty laughter coming from outside the front hall. Pang Xiao pushed open the door and ordered someone to lift the warm curtains. He hurriedly knelt down and saluted, Your Majesty. Your Majesty's presence brings light to my humble abode. Why didn't you tell me so that I could prepare for it? On the surface, Pang Xiao was respectful, but his heart was full of doubts. He had just returned Li Helan to Your Majesty. Although he didn't say anything harsh, he was afraid that Your Majesty's temper would be very embarrassing. Why did they come here in such a short time? Was it because of resentment or guilt? Or was he dissatisfied with him and had other plans? Brother, please get up. Li Qitian supported Pang Xiao with both hands and walked hand in hand into the antechamber. Sitting upright at the head of the table, Li Qitian said with a smile, Zhen thought you would be in front of the elders at this moment, or in the study. Unexpectedly, I found out you were here after asking. This front hall is very cold. Virtuous younger brother, you must not catch a cold. These words seemed ordinary, but they were full of deep meaning and probing. Pang Xiao was already alert. What happened in the Wang Fu just now had probably reached Li Qitian's ears. Li Qitian might not know the inside story, but he definitely knew that the old madam had come to visit. In the end, he left while cursing and was chased by the large black dog down the street. Many thanks for Your Majesty's concern. Pang Xiao stood at the side with his head bowed and said respectfully, a guest just came to the Fu and left not long ago. This subject originally wanted to accompany grandmother and chat. I see. Li Qitian nodded. At this time, Li Guanwen respectfully served tea. Li Qitian took the tea and sent Li Guanwen and the other attendants away. When there was no one else in the room, he said with a smile, "Brother, sit down and talk. We are brothers, there is no need to be so restrained." "Many thanks for your majesty." Pang Xiao cupped his hands in salute and sat down on a round-backed chair at the side. Li Qitian said, "Tomorrow is the imperial court meeting. Zhen specially came here because there is something I want to discuss with virtuous younger brother." Qin Yining, who was hiding behind the screen, held his breath and didn't dare to make the slightest sound. When he heard Li Qitian say this, he immediately frowned in confusion. Li Qitian took a sip of tea and said with a pleasant expression, "Virtuous younger brother helped Zhen quell the chaos in the south. Zhen is very moved and grateful. Previously, in consideration of virtuous younger brother's health, Zhen arranged for you to rest for a period of time and didn't reward you with an official position. Virtuous younger brother won't blame Zhen, right?" "Your Majesty, what are you talking about?" Pang Xiao said casually, "You understand this subject's temperament the best. This subject is used to being lazy and has no patience for troublesome matters. When I first followed your Majesty to conquer the world, it was so that one day, I could live a good life without worrying about anything. Now, this subject's life is what I look forward to. Everything this subject has is given to me by your Majesty. This subject is very grateful, so how could I blame you? To be honest, if it weren't for your Majesty, how could I, Peng Zhishi, have the glory, splendor, wealth, and rank I have today? Your Majesty's promises are worth 1,000 gold. What you promised when we were conquering the world has been fulfilled." This subject is grateful to the point of tears. When Li Qitian heard this, his expression changed. "AI. Even now, when I think about the past, I still feel a lingering fear." Qin Yining, who was behind the screen, heard Li Qitian reminiscing about the past and playing the emotional card. She couldn't help but secretly praise Pang Xiao's answer just now. This was the first time she saw the way Pang Xiao and Li Qitian interacted. She finally understood why Li Qitian was so afraid of Pang Xiao but didn't immediately fall out with him. On the one hand, Li Qitian probably didn't have the confidence to fall out with Pang Xiao. On the other hand, it was also the result of Pang Xiao acting subservient. When he showed weakness, it would timely evoke the hot-blooded memories of the past between the two. Not only would this make Li Qitian relax his vigilance, but it would also make Li Qitian occasionally think about their past relationship. When making decisions, he would have some misgivings. However, Qin Yining's heart ached more for Pang Xiao. She really didn't want her man to be bullied, but she was like a fish on a chopping block. There was no other way. Li Qitian reminisced about the past and also remembered some of his dead brothers. He stood up and patted Pang Xiao's shoulder. "How could Jin not know your temperament? However, you are a person of great talent. Jin also doesn't want to bury your talent. While Jin let you rest, Jin also carefully observed you. After thinking about it, Jin decided to let you enter the cabinet and become a cabinet scholar. You will be Jin's right-hand man." Because de Zhou had absorbed the drawbacks of Beiji's prime minister monopolizing power, de Zhou abolished the prime minister system and changed it to a cabinet system. The cabinet was composed of one grand secretary, one secondary secretary, and a number of other grand secretaries. In total, there were 3 to 7 grand secretaries. When it was time to discuss matters, the cabinet members would discuss and finally vote to decide. The Grand Secretary had 2 votes, the Secondary Secretary and the other Grand Secretaries each had 1 vote. Li Qitian said earnestly, "Xiandi, you are someone who followed Jin to conquer the world. Jin won't hide anything from you. Don't look at Jin sitting on the throne right now. There are many people who are sincerely convinced by Jin. The ministers formed cliques and factions, each doing their own thing. On the surface, they are respectful to Jin, but in reality, they each have their own thoughts. Take the current cabinet for example. The current Grand Secretary is a remnant of the faction of the surrendered ministers of Beiji. He is of virtue and prestige and had a lot of prestige in the previous dynasty. If Jin wants to have a good relationship with the surrendered ministers of Beiji and have them listen to Jin must be careful. Secondary Secretary Zhou Qiong is still fine. He is Jin's father-in-law, one of Jin's own people. Chapter 329. It had to be said that Li Qitian's words were extremely provocative. A good man should aspire to travel far. Pang Xiao wasn't a coward who only knew how to indulge in debauchery. Presumably, when he started the rebellion, he thought that when he stood in a high position and had the ability to fight against the cruel old system, he would definitely achieve great things. Li Qitian's words touched the itch in Pang Xiao's heart. Qin Yining hid behind the screen and quickly calculated in her mind. When she connected the recent events, she immediately felt that the situation wasn't simple. She nervously held her breath and concentrated. Pang Xiao raised his voice slightly. "Is your Majesty serious?" "Of course." Li Qitian was also very excited. "Back then, why did we conquer the world? Wasn't it because we wanted to stand on top of those corrupt officials' heads and ruthlessly stomp on them a few times? Who would have thought that the world is already ours, but it's not up to us to decide the matters of the imperial court?" Pang Xiao agreed. "Yes, but there's nothing we can do about it. Back then, when I followed your Majesty to start the rebellion, we raised provisions everywhere. If it weren't for the support of a few aristocratic families, we wouldn't have had enough money to support it. Your Majesty must have considered the conditions of those aristocratic families. These aristocratic families, even the weakest among them, have been entrenched in Beiji for more than 100 years. Not only are they rich, but they also have a deep background and extensive connections. I'm afraid that many of the imperial court officials are also in contact with them." "You're right," Li Qitian said. "Only a brother like you, who walked with me, can understand my difficulties. There are often people who talk about me behind my back, saying that I'm afraid of those surrendered officials in Beiji and that I actually let them control the imperial court. But who can understand my difficulties?" Li Qitian paused and then waved his hand. "But I'm not afraid now. Tomorrow, I will confer you the title of Grand Secretary of the Imperial Cabinet. Although you won't be able to be the first assistant for the time being, we still have 3 votes in the Imperial Cabinet, which is enough to contend against those old remnants of Beiji. When the time comes, we won't have to look at those people's faces anymore." Pang Xiao's blood was boiling, but he still looked a little worried. "Your Majesty is right. It's just that I have little talent and knowledge. I'm afraid I can't take up the position of Grand Secretary of the Imperial Cabinet." Li Qitian waved his hand and said, "You don't have to belittle yourself. If we say you can shoulder the responsibility, then you can. Don't decline. Tomorrow, we'll do as we discussed." Pang Xiao nodded excitedly and replied in high spirits, "Yes, Your Majesty." "Thank you for Your Majesty." When Pang Xiao saw this, he smiled and asked, "Sister Yi, what do you think?" Qin Yining didn't expect that he would ask him first. He was stunned for a moment. He looked hesitantly at Su Weiji and Xiaoyu. Xiaoyu smiled and said, "Miss Qin, you are very intelligent. Since you heard everything clearly just now, you must have thought it through carefully. Why don't you tell us your thoughts first?" "That's right. Miss Qin, you don't have to be too cautious. Since this is a discussion, you should speak freely. Let's exchange ideas. If Miss Qin has any ideas, please feel free to speak." Qin Yining stood up and bowed. He smiled and said, "Then I will show off my slight skill in front of an expert." The two strategists cupped their hands in obeisance. Qin Yining returned to his seat. He thought for a moment and said, "I think that your Majesty's actions today are very strange. It doesn't seem like you're really inviting Wang Yi into the pavilion. Instead, it seems like you're deliberately playing the emotional card to numb Wang Yi. Not only do you not want to give Wang Yi an official position, but you also want Wang Yi to bear infamy and not get anything." "Oh." Su Weiji raised her eyebrows. She immediately understood. Qin Yining continued, "We all know about Wang Yi's situation. When we took down Beiji, Wang Yi contributed the most, but he also bore the most infamy. In the camp of Beiji's surrendered officials, I'm afraid that everyone sees Wang Yi as an enemy. Your Majesty's hatred has taken away quite a bit." Pang Shao nodded. "You're right. That's why I think this matter is strange. From the conversation between Wang Yi and Your Majesty just now, we know that the surrendered officials of Beiji are backed by many powerful aristocratic families. These aristocratic families provided Your Majesty and Wang Yi's army with a lot of financial support. That's why you were able to hold on until you took down Beiji." Chapter 330. Qin Yining couldn't help but stand up and pace back and forth. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that this matter was tricky. Your Majesty's move is too insidious. I just heard Your Majesty telling Wang Yi not to refuse. But what if the old officials of Northern Ji and the connections of the aristocratic families unite to oppose Wang Yi in public during the court meeting tomorrow? Your Majesty is biased towards the old officials of Northern Ji. If they unite, Your Majesty will have no choice but to give up." Su Weiji shook his head and said, "At that time, what will the outsiders say? Wang Yi failed to enter the cabinet and will be ridiculed for overestimating himself. Wang Yi is famous and can't afford to lose face like this. If his reputation is tarnished, it won't be good for Wang Yi's future development. More importantly, Your Majesty gave Wang Yi this official position in the name of rewarding Wang Yi for pacifying the Dayan. Your Majesty gave Wang Yi this position, but since Wang Yi doesn't have the ability to take this position, then you can't blame Your Majesty." Xia Yu frowned and broke out in a cold sweat. "In my opinion, Your Majesty wants to take the opportunity to beat Wang Yi to the bottom of the valley and make him a laughingstock. This will solve the problem once and for all." The three people's analysis was meticulous and detailed. Even though Pang Shao was a little hot-blooded because of Li Qitian's incitement, when he calmed down and thought about it again, he realized that something was wrong. The study fell into silence. After a long time, Xia Yu said, "Old Su, quickly think of a way. We can't let Wang Yi refuse in public tomorrow. That will be defying the imperial decree." Su Weiji rubbed his chin and said, "Of course, we can't defy the imperial decree. It's a good thing to enter the cabinet, but Wang Yi's future is more important. We have to look further." Pang Shao nodded and said, "Naturally, I can't follow Your Majesty's wishes on this matter. I definitely can't wait until tomorrow when Your Majesty announces the decree in the imperial court and has people slander me in public. At the end of the day, this is not only a dispute between Wang Yi and Your Majesty, but also a dispute between Your Majesty and the old officials of Northern Ji for power." Qin Yining sat down again. His eyes were bright, and it was obvious that he already had an idea. Su Weiji was good at scheming and had always been the best at offering advice to Pang Shao. Now that he saw a little girl who was more quick-witted than him, he smiled and asked with interest, "Miss Qin, do you have an idea?" Qin Yining's eyes sparkled. He didn't answer the question. "Tell me, what would you do if you were robbed of a string of coins?" Xia Yu said, "Of course I would snatch the money back, beat the robber, and then report it to the authorities." Qin Yining nodded and asked again, "But if you were not only robbed of a string of coins, but your wife was also kidnapped and sold, and your child was thrown into a well, what would you do? This analogy was too bloody, but the people present were all smart people. No one cared about the inappropriateness of this analogy. Everyone's heart seemed to have flashed with a bright light. Pang Xiao, Xiaoyu, and Su Weiji looked at each other. The three of them looked at Qin Yining together and couldn't help laughing. Su Weiji stood up and cupped his hands at Qin Yining. Miss Qin is really a woman's shuga. This old man admits defeat. I'm convinced. This time, I'm completely convinced. Mr. Su, what are you talking about? Qin Yining hurriedly stood up and returned the salute. Pang Xiao looked at Qin Yining with admiration and pride in his eyes. Then, he looked at Xiaoyu questioningly. Xiaoyu was very decisive. She could always choose the most appropriate decision out of several. Xiaoyu nodded with a smile and said, Wang Yi, I think Miss Qin's idea is very good. Your Majesty has announced that you will join the cabinet. For the old officials of Beiji, it's equivalent to being robbed of a string of coins. They won't do anything to your Majesty. At most, they will try their best to refuse your entry and think of a way to push you out. But if this matter is blown out of proportion, it will be different. We will immediately spread rumors and let the old officials of Beiji and the aristocratic families know that your Majesty will replace all the old officials of Beiji in the cabinet with his trusted subordinates in tomorrow's court meeting. In this way, it won't be as simple as being robbed of a string of coins. If there are no old officials of Beiji in the cabinet, it will be equivalent to throwing a child into a well and selling off his wife. These old officials and aristocratic families will definitely fight with all their might. Wang Yi can just sit back and watch the show. Pang Xiao smiled and nodded. You're right. He looked at Qin Yining with a gentle gaze. Moreover, this king will not only have a good show to watch, but he will also benefit from it. Qin Yining blushed under his gaze. She lowered her head and avoided his gaze. Xiaoyu and Su Weiji saw this and stood up tactfully. They bowed and said, since this is the plan, we will go and make the arrangements. Thank you for your trouble. Pang Xiao politely sent the two of them out of the door. When they returned to the study, Pang Xiao picked up Qin Yining like he was carrying a child. His strong arms supported her buttocks and he spun her around a few times. Qin Yining was so frightened that she almost screamed. She wrapped her arms around his neck and grabbed his shoulders to steady herself. What are you doing? Put me down. Good Sister E, you're really my good wife. You really made me proud just now. Now, Mr. Su and Mr. Xia must be very envious of me. What are you talking about? You're not a child anymore. Qin Yining could not help but laugh. She did not expect Pang Xiao to be like a child, showing off and being proud of something like this. Pang Xiao put her down and kissed her on the cheek. He hugged her and rocked her. Sister E, it's so good to have you by my side. It seems that I have the ability to solve any problems that I encounter. I'm not worried about myself at all because I'm full of motivation and have the energy to do everything. Sister E, don't go. Stay with me, okay? Put aside the talent show and let me investigate carefully. You can decide after I see the situation, okay? Such an iron-blooded and domineering person was actually like a large dog at this moment. He was just short of wagging his tail at her. How could Qin Yining bear to disappoint him? She could only say, okay, I won't leave today. You go and investigate first. We'll talk after you understand the situation. Pang Xiao nodded happily. Then you don't have to go to the talent show, okay? You've just promised me that you'll only follow me. You can't go back on your word. You're so domineering. Qin Yining's heart felt warm. She pretended to be angry and punched him lightly on the shoulder. Pang Xiao said very seriously, yes, I'm domineering, but I'm only domineering about one thing, and that is that you must belong to me. As long as you fulfill this condition of mine, in my world, if you want to climb the roof and tear down the tiles, I'll build a ladder for you. If you want to go down the river to fish, I'll be your assistant. I'll do whatever you want. I won't ask you to do anything for me. I can even make delicious food for you. My cooking skills are not bad, and I can make a lot of delicious food. Even my grandfather praises my cooking skills. I can also take you around to have fun. I won't restrict your freedom, and I won't bury your talent. You can do whatever you want as long as you fulfill this condition of mine. Sister E, you're so smart. This is a good deal. Just agree, okay? Chapter 331. That night, Qin Yining was smiling even in her sleep. In her dream, Pang Xiao kept asking her, "Can you stay by my side?" She nodded boldly in her dream and was much more honest than in reality. Qin Yining used to be confused about the future, but it was different now. She must stay by his side no matter how difficult it was. No matter what kind of adversity he was in, she would not let go. If there was a storm, they would face it together. The next morning, Qin Yining was being combed by Ji Yun and Xian Yun when she woke up. Bing Tang, who had gone to the front office to inquire about the situation, came back. "Miss, Wang Yi left early today. He said that there was a court meeting, so he left early." Bing Tang smiled as she took out a delicate pouch and hung it around the neck of Lian Xiaozhou, who was eating snacks. Lian Xiaozhou's cheeks were still stained with crumbs of snacks. She looked down at the pouch, grabbed it and smelled it. Then, she smiled in surprise and ran to Qin Yining to present the pouch. "Sister, it smells good." "Yes. There are dried flower petals and a few medicinal herbs in this pouch. Smelling it in this weather can prevent you from catching a cold." Bing Tang knew that Lian Xiaozhou was lonely and had difficulty speaking. After careful diagnosis, she concluded that it would be difficult for her to speak like a normal person in this life. She felt even more pity for this little sister. Qin Yining smiled and said, "That's great. Little Kanji, why aren't you thanking Bing Tang's sister?" Lian Xiaozhou looked at Bing Tang, who was not much taller than her, and bowed with a smile. "Thank you. You're welcome." Bing Tang waved her hand. Qiu Lu brought over a light blue jacket that Qin Yining was going to wear today. She smiled and said, "Our Bing Tang sister can finally enjoy being a sister." Qiu Lu was usually not a talkative person, but she would occasionally hit the nail on the head. Bing Tang snorted and pretended to be angry. "You want to be the younger sister, but who told you to be the oldest? Later, I'll ask the girl to choose a Ru-Yi husband for you and match you with him. When the time comes, what should I call that person in your family? Brother-in-law? You little bitch, you only know how to make things up. Watch me tear your mouth apart." Qiu Lu put down her clothes and wanted to chase after Bing Tang. Bing Tang went around the square table and played with Qiu Lu. The few of them found it funny. Qiu Lu had been with Qin Yining for the longest time and was also the oldest among them. She was usually quiet and meticulous. After she returned, she continued to manage the jewelry, clothes, and the expenses of the room for Qin Yining. She was very respected by Xian Yun and Ji Yun. Xian Yun smiled and said, "Before you came back, I was the only one accompanying the girl." The room was very cold and cheerless. The girl was always depressed. Only Wang Yi could make the girl happy. Now, it's good. Everyone is safe and sound. Even Sister Qiu Lu has learned to play. It's clear that the feng shui of the Wang residence is good and will bring good luck to the girl. At this point, Xian Yun inserted a green jade hairpin into Qin Yining's hair. She looked at Qin Yining's fair face in the mirror and said with a smile, "Girl, why don't you hurry up and marry him?" Qin Yining rolled her eyes at her. Before she could say anything, Ji Yun said with a smile, "Wang Yi must be thinking like this every day. You bad girls. It seems like I've spoiled you. When I return, I'll tell Wang Yi to beat you." Qin Yining snorted. The girls laughed and played together. Even the servant girl who came from outside to reply to them spoke loudly, but they only heard her after she spoke. Ji Yun went to open the door and asked, "What's the matter?" The servant girl stood in the middle of the courtyard and looked curiously at the half-open door. She smiled and said, replying to Miss, "There are 2 Qin masters in front. They said they are Miss Qin's uncles. Mr. Su has seen them and instructed the servant to inform Mississippi Miss. Do you plan to meet them in Su Shui Garden or in the front hall?" The laughter in the room stopped. The smile on Qin Yining's face faded as she said, "I'll go to the front hall." "Yes." The servant girl looked curiously at the room before she bowed and left. Bing Tang restrained her expression and asked, "Miss, do you really want to meet them? They must be here to force you to attend the consort selection. Why don't you just pretend to be sick?" "That's right, Mississippi," Chiu Lu and Ji Yun said in unison. They supported Qin Yining and Pang Xiao from the bottom of their hearts. They didn't want Qin Yining to serve your majesty. Qin Yining stood up and put on the cloak. "You can hide for a while, but you can't hide forever. It's not the same thing to avoid meeting them. What should be said must be said openly. Old Madam came yesterday and only gave a tyrannical order. She didn't say anything. I also want to know my father's whereabouts. Ji Yun, Bing Tang, come with me." "Yes." The 2 bowed and followed Qin Yining out the door. In the front hall, 2nd Old Master and 3rd Old Master were having tea with Su Weiji. Su Weiji's attire appeared more gorgeous in front of 2nd Old Master and 3rd Old Master, who were wearing simple cotton-padded jackets. She also put on the airs of a steward of the Wang estate. Seeing that Qin Yining had arrived, Su Weiji glanced in the direction of 2nd Old Master and 3rd Old Master. She coughed and said sternly, "I see your family members coming to disturb you all day long. You should resolve them properly. Don't let Wang Yi worry." Qin Yining immediately understood and nodded. "Yes. Thank you, steward." Su Weiji couldn't help but smile when she saw that Qin Yining reacted so quickly. She nodded and walked out with her hands behind her back. Qin Yining instructed Ji Yun and Bing Tang, who came with him, wait at the door. "Yes." When only the uncle and niece were left in the room, Qin Yining bowed to 2nd Old Master and 3rd Old Master. "Second uncle, 3rd uncle, long time no see." 2nd Old Master and 3rd Old Master had lost a lot of weight. Looking at their attire, although they weren't as down and out as Pang Zhao's spies, they definitely weren't doing well. When Qin Yining saw the old madam yesterday, he wanted to ask her about it. Therefore, he bluntly asked, "Second uncle, 3rd uncle, did you encounter any accidents on your way here? Do you know where my father is?" 2nd Old Master sighed and said, "Sister Yi, we came here today to talk to you about this. When we were escaping that day, we got separated from your father, mother, and concubine mother. We managed to rush to the capital with great difficulty, but we were kidnapped by a group of people." "What?" Qin Yining was extremely shocked. Ji Ziyu shouldn't have made a second move. 3rd Old Master had an impatient personality and spilled the beans. "Our entire family was kidnapped. Not only were the belongings that we brought with us stolen by that group of bandits, but they also said that your father, mother, and concubine mother are currently in their hands. If we want them to continue living and if we still want our family's belongings, we have to send you to the selection of concubines. They specifically targeted me." "Who are they?" Qin Yining was both shocked and angry. She never would have thought that the cause of this incident was actually a kidnapping. Chapter 332. Qin Yining was shocked beyond words. Who did she think she was? She was just a little girl. How could she have the honor of being targeted by kidnappers? How could they kidnap her parents and family just so she could enter the palace for the selection? Ridiculous, this was simply ridiculous. Seeing Qin Yining's extremely ugly expression, second master and third master also hung their heads in dejection. Second master said, "Sister Yi, your second aunt came with your grandmother. When she returned, she told me everything that happened here. Your third uncle and I also saw that even the housekeeper of their residence was so negligent towards you. It's clear that Prince Zhongshuan is holding a grudge against you. He should be holding a grudge against you for killing his father." This was exactly what Qin Yining and Pang Xiao wanted to show when they joined forces. Therefore, Qin Yining only nodded silently. Her lowered head made people feel pity for her. Second master sighed and said, "Second uncle knows that ever since you returned home, you haven't had a peaceful day. For the sake of the bigger picture, I've always wronged you. It's the same this time. Your grandmother is worried about your father. She's also afraid that our family will go bankrupt and that our entire family won't be able to survive in the capital. That's why she didn't ask you before putting your name up. Second uncle also knows that this is wronging you. But, a girl will eventually have to marry someone in this lifetime, isn't that right? In the past, second uncle thought that if Prince Zhongshuan could let bygones be bygones and treat you wholeheartedly, it wouldn't be a bad idea for you to follow him. But now that Prince Zhongshuan treats you like this, I'm afraid that you won't have a good life if you stay in the prince's residence. In that case, whether you enter the palace or stay in the prince's residence, there's no difference. With your intelligence, perhaps you'll have a better future if you enter the palace." Second master was indeed someone who had been an official for many years. When he spoke slowly and methodically. Qin Yining couldn't refute him. She really wanted to ask, entering the palace or the prince's residence is the same. Don't tell me that you don't need to ask for my opinion. She also really wanted to say, is it because you want a better future in the palace so that you can contribute to the family? Is this your original intention? But these reasons were already obvious, so there was no need to ask, because that was what she meant. As a member of the family Qin, he had to step forward when his family was in trouble. Qin Yining agreed with this approach. She also knew that she had enjoyed the protection of her family when she was in glory, so she had no reason to refuse to contribute to her family when she was down. However, there was always another voice in Qin Yining's heart that asked him, "Why me? Why me again?" Qin Yining lowered his head and didn't say anything. Second old master and third old master also felt very awkward. After all, it wasn't nice for an uncle to force his niece to serve a man. Second old master and third old master weren't like old madam who was used to making a scene, so they were also embarrassed and didn't say anything. Qin Yining, on the other hand, thought of the key point after a brief moment of injustice. "Second uncle, third uncle, why do you think the kidnappers wanted me to enter the palace?" Second old master and third old master looked at each other and shook their heads. "Although our family was prominent in the Dayan dynasty no longer exists. Coming to the Zhou dynasty is equivalent to starting from scratch. You are a girl, but the kidnappers wanted you to enter the consort selection. There must be an unspeakable reason. Otherwise, why would they target you?" Qin Yining said, "Could it be because Prince Zhongshuan treated me well in the Dayan, so someone with ulterior motives thought that Prince Zhongshuan must think highly of me? In addition, I was kidnapped by Prince Zhongshuan and brought back to the Wangfu as soon as I arrived in the capital." Second old master had been an official for many years. Although he wasn't as outstanding and famous as Qin Huaiyuan, he was still a person with a clear mind. Third old master had excellent business skills and wasn't an ignorant person. The two of them understood before Qin Yining finished speaking. Third Old Master couldn't help but lower his voice and ask anxiously, Sister Yi, do you suspect that someone is trying to sow discord between the Zhou dynasty's emperor and Wang Yi? Qin Yining nodded heavily and said in a low voice, or rather, someone is trying to worsen the relationship between your majesty and Wang Yi. She laughed self-deprecatingly. They really think highly of me. Are they so sure that once I enter the palace, I will cause even more discord between Wang Yi and your majesty? I didn't expect the Zhou imperial court to be so chaotic. Third Old Master couldn't help but sigh. Second Old Master said, where there are people, there will be Jianghu. Isn't it the same everywhere? I just didn't expect the conflict in the Zhou imperial court to be so intense. Someone wants to use our Sister Yi as a chess piece to sow discord. When Second Old Master said this, his expression suddenly turned cold. Sister Yi, you can't enter the palace. Second brother. If I don't let Sister Yi enter the palace, what will happen to big brother and sister-in-law? And our family's belongings? We can earn more if we lose our family's belongings. You don't have to worry about big brother and sister-in-law's safety. Second Old Master waved his hand and interrupted Third Old Master. He looked at Qin Yining and said, since we can be sure that someone wants to use you to sow discord between your majesty and Wang Yi, then our family can't get involved in this muddy water. If Qin Yining could enter the palace and become a favored concubine, then the family Qin would be like a banner under your majesty, Pang Shao, and those old officials from Beiji. The family Qin had just arrived, so how could they have the confidence to get involved in this muddy water? Although Qin Yining knew that Second Old Master was only saying this for the sake of the family's interests and not because he cherished her, she still felt relieved. If she had the support of Second Uncle and Third Uncle, it would be easier for her to refuse the consort selection. Second Uncle, I suspect that this was done by the old officials from Beiji. Second Old Master pondered for a moment and slowly nodded. Indeed, they are the most suspicious. If it was really done by them, then we don't have to worry about the safety of my father and mother. After all, the old officials from Beiji still have to continue to mingle with them, so they can't completely offend your majesty. As the saying goes, give a sweet date after a slap. Your majesty specifically asked for us Dain people, and my father is a representative figure among the officials of the Yan dynasty. If they kill my father, your majesty won't be able to explain it to your majesty. These people had a sense of propriety and wouldn't recklessly offend Li Qitian. They also knew where Li Qitian's bottom line was. Therefore, they would do many things within Li Qitian's bottom line that made people feel depressed but helpless. Second Old Master and Third Old Master thought carefully and couldn't help but nod. Sister Yi is right. Then this matter is settled. We have to think of a way to not participate in the consort selection. It's just that we've already submitted our names. Sigh, your grandmother, why is she so anxious? Second Old Master couldn't help but complain. Qin Yining felt helpless. On the one hand, the Dowager Duchess was worried about her eldest son. On the other hand, she should be more concerned about the family's property. This was also understandable. After all, the Qin family was a large family with an inheritance. If they became penniless, then in the short term, at least in the old madam's lifetime, it would be very difficult to see the Qin family live a life of luxury and pampered maidservants and children like before. Second Uncle, you don't have to think too much. Grandmother is doing this for the family. Qin Yining thought for a moment and said, I have a way to solve this matter now. What do you plan to do? Third Old Master asked curiously. Chapter 333. Sue the Emperor. You want to sue the old officials of Northern Ji. Third Old Master was so shocked that he couldn't think straight. He said anxiously in a low voice, that's not right. They didn't show up from the beginning to the end. Their subordinates also wore plain clothes and covered their faces. They didn't reveal any flaws. We don't have any evidence and we're only relying on our analysis. How can we win the lawsuit? Second Old Master smiled and stroked his beard. He shook his head and said, "Third brother, you're confused. Since you know that you don't have any evidence, why would Sister E sue them?" Third Old Master wasn't stupid. He was just too shocked. He thought for a moment and understood. He couldn't help but look at Qin Yining worriedly. "Sister E, third uncle understands what you want to do. It's just that this won't be good for your reputation. Third uncle. I've been through a lot since I returned home. If we're talking about reputation, it's already been ruined when I followed my father to the peace talks. What's more, Prince Zhongshuan and the county king of Yan's actions. Who knows what outsiders will say about me?" Qin Yining smiled bitterly. "My reputation is already like this. I don't care if it's ruined or not. As long as our family can get out of this mess, sacrificing me isn't a big deal. Dezhou's imperial court is treacherous and the situation is complicated. Our family doesn't have a foundation in Dezhou and we don't have any backing. We can't even protect our family, let alone participate in the dispute between the two factions. If one only used facts and reason to make the other party do things according to one's wishes, it would often backfire. The most effective way to negotiate was to make the other party understand how much they could benefit from doing what they wanted to do. The best way was to use the benefits that they could obtain to lead the other party down the path they wanted to take." Sure enough, Second Old Master and Third Old Master looked at Qin Yining. Their expressions were very moved. Letting Qin Yining enter the palace was for the sake of the family. Now that they had figured out the reason, letting her reject this matter was also for the sake of the family. In the end, she had to suffer. "Sister E, if you really do that, I'm afraid your future marriage will be affected." Second Master was an upright person, and Qin Yining was his junior, so he bluntly told her about the drawbacks of Qin Yining's idea. Qin Yining smiled gratefully. "Second uncle, I understand your concern, but how can any eggs remain intact when the nest is overturned? Only when my family Qin is good can I live a good life. What's more, when second uncle and third uncle achieve meteoric success in the future, how could they watch their niece not be able to get married?" Second Master was infected by her mischievous smile and couldn't help but smile. He sighed and promised, "Don't worry. Second uncle knows how much you've done for your family Qin in the past. This time, for the sake of your family Qin's safety, you didn't hesitate to sacrifice your bright future by refusing to enter the palace and sullying your reputation. I will remember your efforts. In the future, your matters will be second uncle's matters." "That's right. Your third uncle doesn't have any other skills, but I do have some methods for doing business. In the future, as long as third uncle has a bite to eat, I won't let you suffer a loss." Third Master was also moved and promised. Not all girls would be able to resist the temptation of wealth and glory at their fingertips. There were many examples of women who didn't hesitate to sacrifice their family and relationships for the sake of their bright future. When Second Master and Third Master thought of this, they both sighed at the same time. Qin Yining knew that she had convinced them to stand on the same side as her and couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. Whether it was for the sake of the family Qin's future or because she had promised Pang Xiao that she wouldn't leave him, she definitely couldn't enter the palace this time. Now that she was able to reach a consensus with second uncle and third uncle, she wasn't fighting alone on the family Qin side. She couldn't change the thoughts of old madam and those womenfolk, but with second uncle and third uncle, they would be able to figure it out sooner or later. Since she had already made a decision, Qin Yining discussed the specific actions with second master and third master. In the end, Qin Yining sighed and said, "Since it's like this, second uncle and third uncle can leave this matter to me. You guys also don't have to show up easily. If it was someone else, second master and third master naturally wouldn't feel at ease. However, Qin Yining had always been reliable. The two only muttered to themselves for a moment before nodding. Qin Yining stood up to send the two off. During this time, he met the rude and unreasonable steward of the Wang Fu and played the entire act. This made second master and third master even more certain that Qin Yining had already lost Pang Zhao's favor. The two shook their heads and sighed as they left. Qin Yining then brought Ji Yun and Bing Tang back to Su Shuiyuan. She carefully thought over the matter of entering the palace and silently planned her next steps in the letter. Pang Zhao's court was dismissed very late today. It wasn't until sunset that a young maidservant came to inform Qin Yining, Wang Yi has returned. He asked Miss to serve him tea in the study. Qin Yining immediately understood that Pang Zhao must have something to discuss with her. She hurriedly rushed to the study in the outer courtyard. At this time, Su Weiji and Xia Yu had just entered the courtyard where the study was located. The two sides greeted each other and then entered the study one after the other. Pang Zhao instructed Huzi to carefully order people to guard outside. He then smiled and said, "Everyone, sit down." Qin Yining's large eyes sparkled as she looked at Pang Zhao. She smiled and said, "Wang Yi is in high spirits. He must have succeeded in entering the cabinet." Pang Zhao looked at her smiling eyes and couldn't help but smile as well. "It's all thanks to your wonderful plan. So Wang Yi has already resolved this crisis," Xia Yu said excitedly. "Wang Yi, quickly tell us what will happen in today's court session." Pang Zhao was in a good mood today. He smiled and told them what had happened today. As it turned out, Li Qitian had summarized Pang Zhao's contributions in pacifying the Dayan in the south. Finally, he praised him. "Just as he said, Prince Zhongshuan has pacified the south. I am very happy. I specially confer." Before he could finish his sentence, he was suddenly interrupted by an old official from Beiji. Li Qitian was in high spirits. He was unhappy that his speech was suddenly interrupted. However, he was a wise ruler in everyone's eyes. Naturally, he wouldn't stop an official from speaking. He could only swallow his words and ask. The old official was a member of the faction of the surrendered officials from Beiji. This time, he was not as cautious as he used to be. He loudly impeached Zhou Qiong, the Grand Secretary of Jinji Hall. Zhou Qiong was the father of the Empress and Li Qitian's father-in-law. As the father-in-law of the Emperor and the assistant minister in the cabinet, he had been internally appointed as the next Grand Secretary. As long as the current Grand Secretary was in charge, he would immediately be promoted. He was used to being proud of himself. Who would have thought that someone would impeach him in the court session? Zhou Qiong was stunned by the stick. Li Qitian was also stunned. Before the father-in-law and son-in-law came to their senses, the surrendered officials from Beiji who had heard the news that Your Majesty is going to kick all the remaining officials from Beiji out of the cabinet today, huddled together and listed the evidence of Zhou Qiong's crimes one by one. "Why are you still in a daze?" Pang Zhao stared blankly at Huzi. Huzi's scalp went numb. He hurriedly called over a sturdy woman and held Qin Yining up. Bing Tang and Ji Yun were both shocked and angry at this time. They felt sorry for Qin Yining, but Pang Zhao seemed to have turned to stone. He didn't feel any pity for Qin Yining anymore. He ordered in a deep voice, "The mansion doesn't have any servants. The prince's mansion doesn't raise a freeloader. Since this prince is tired of playing with her, then there's no point in keeping her. All of you, get out." Qin Yining looked up at Pang Zhao with teary eyes. She was so choked with sobs that she almost couldn't speak. Bing Tang was so angry that her face turned red. She broke free from the woman holding her and rushed to Pang Zhao, "You ungrateful ingrate. Who do you think you are? Aren't you just a lousy Wang Yi who can't even wear a hat properly? What are you so proud of? Are you bullying our miss because she doesn't have anyone to support her? You're not human. She really didn't expect that the two people she had seen with her own eyes would become like this. Huzi hurriedly stepped forward and stopped Bing Tang. He reprimanded her in a deep voice, "Shut up. Wang Yi is not someone you can slander." Bing Tang couldn't break free. She immediately threw her hands at Huzi's face. "Get out. You're all vines. You bullied our Mississippi. You'll die a horrible death." Bah! Huzi saw Bing Tang so angry for the first time. He was stunned. Qin Yining saw Bing Tang protecting her so much. She was touched and guilty. She quickly grabbed her hand and squeezed it. Bing Tang was stunned by her pinch. She looked at her in confusion. Qin Yining looked at Pang Xiao. "Since that's the case, let's leave. But I want to take my maidservants with me. This king doesn't want to keep any of your people. Take those who have been serving you for the past few days with you," Pang Xiao said insincerely. She forced herself not to urge them to stay. Qin Yining seemed to be disheartened. She pulled Bing Tang and Ji Yun and turned to leave. When they walked out of the gate, Xian Yun, Qiu Lu, and Lian Xiaozhou were also thrown out with their bags. Chapter 335. Being thrown out of the mansion without any warning, the maids were all dumbfounded. They looked at each other. Seeing Qin Yining's sad appearance, they couldn't help but feel worried. They wanted to comfort her, but they couldn't find the right words at the moment. Qin Yining patted Bing Tang's shoulder comfortingly, then held Lian Xiaozhou's hand, wiped the tears on her face, and said, "Let's go. We have to rush to the hotel before the curfew. I'm not familiar with the roads in the capital." "Ji Yun, Xian Yun, do you know the way?" Both of them nodded. They also knew that it wasn't convenient to talk outside, so they suppressed the doubts in their hearts and led Qin Yining and the others to the hotel. In the winter evening in the north, the wind was bone-chilling, and there were many snowflakes in it. Even if Qin Yining wore thick clothes, she couldn't adapt. She was cold from the inside out, and the white air she breathed out hit her face. Soon, the wind hair on her collar and the long hair on her temples were covered with a layer of white frost. Ji Yun supported Qin Yining and said with annoyance, "Wang Yi is really too much. We can't even take care of the carriage in the middle of the night." Because she didn't know what was going on between Qin Yining and Pang Xiao, Ji Yun was afraid that she would be sad, so she could only shut her mouth and swallow the rest of her words. Fortunately, Qin Yining wasn't a delicate person, and they had all suffered before. Finally, they arrived at the hotel before the curfew. As soon as the news was announced, second master and third master immediately rushed out to welcome them. Eldest master Qin Yu, second master Qin Han, and fifth master Qin Xian followed closely behind. Behind them were 10th master Qin Rong and 11th master Qin Zong, who were just 6 years old. Finally, 8th Miss Qin Baoning and Qin Huining came. Except for old madam, second madam, and Han's second young mistress, as well as Qin Huayuan, his wife, and Chao Yuqing, who were kidnapped, the whole family was basically present. "Sister Yi, why did you come back at this time?" Third old master went down the stairs and asked anxiously. He kept looking at Qin Yining, for fear that she would be bullied. Qin Yining smiled but didn't answer. Her beautiful eyes swept over everyone in the family, and she couldn't help but smile. "It's been a long time. Fortunately, we can finally reunite." Just how much helplessness was expressed in a single sentence? They had experienced the extermination of their family, famine, assassination, kidnapping, and now they were still able to gather together. Just how lucky were they? Everyone's eyes began to burn. Miss Ba came forward and hugged Qin Yining. Fourth sister, you're finally back. I was so worried. Qin Xian, the fifth lord, came forward with his two younger brothers and saluted Qin Yining respectfully. Fourth sister. Qin Yining smiled and said, Fifth brother, you've grown taller. Fourth sister, what about me? Qin Zong, who was only 6 years old, looked up at Qin Yining. 11th brother and 10th brother have also grown taller. Speaking of which, our family has been separated for a while. It's cold outside. It's not a good place to talk. Let's go in first. Second old master looked at everyone with a smile. Qin Huayuan wasn't at home, so second old master was everyone's backbone. Therefore, with his words, the whole family went in. There were several 3-story lofts behind the guest house, and there were many side courtyards. Because of Qin Huayuan's reputation, the Qin family was allocated a side courtyard. It was next to the side courtyard of Yu Qi Yan and Princess Consort Li Yan Yan. Across the alley, the Li family and the Gu family lived. The group entered the side courtyard, closed the door, and gathered in Old Madam's main room. At this moment, Old Madam was being served snacks by Mammy Qin and second Old Madam. When she saw the whole family rush in and crowd around Qin Yining, her expression turned ugly. Han second Old Madam, who was leaning on a soft pillow on the heated Kong bed next to the window, also had an uncomfortable expression when she saw Qin Yining. After all, she and Old Madam had eaten Qin Yining's pet rabbit together. Qin Yining didn't have any ill feelings on his face. He went forward and bowed to Old Madam, then to second aunt and second Tang sister-in-law. Second Old Madam and Han second Old Madam were a bit embarrassed when they saw Qin Yining. Fortunately, Qin Yining's attitude towards them was as amiable as before, so they didn't feel that uncomfortable. The whole family talked about what happened after they parted. Everyone knew that Qin Yining was taken into the residence by Pang Xiao as soon as he entered the capital. Therefore, everyone had a tacit understanding not to mention this humiliating experience. After chatting for a while, they saw that it was getting late. Second Old Master then said, Sister Yi, you must be tired as well. Take your men to rest first. We don't have many rooms in this courtyard. Let's all squeeze together and make do. Old Madam sighed, every inch of land in the capital is worth an inch of gold. We don't have any family property. I don't know how long the guest house will let us eat and stay for free. She then looked at Qin Yining, my sister Yi, in the future, our family will have to rely on you. She was naturally talking about letting her enter the palace in exchange for the Qin Huayuan and family Qin's property. Qin Yining looked inquiringly at second Old Master and third Old Master. Seeing their expressions, he knew that they hadn't discussed it clearly with Old Madam. Qin Yining only smiled and didn't answer. He took Bing Tang and the others to the room that Mammy Qin had just helped to tidy up. Just as he walked to the veranda, he heard someone muttering from inside the door, "We're squeezing together and living together. Her servants are all very precious. They're enjoying themselves even more than us masters." Qin Yining turned around and saw Qin Huaining, who was pulling Han's second young mistress aside and complaining in a low voice. Qin Yining smiled and said, "It seems that after surviving several disasters, Miss Huaining hasn't improved at all." Qin Huaining didn't expect that her ears were so sharp that she could hear such a small voice. She couldn't help but feel a bit embarrassed. Thinking that Qin Yining still wanted to enter the palace, she might have limitless prospects in the future. She didn't dare to offend her and just lowered her head, not looking at her. Qin Yining didn't feel like arguing with them and left with his people. He returned to his room and closed the door. Then, he lowered his voice and told his trusted maidservants what had happened. Qin Yining's side had settled down. At the same time, Pang Xiao was suffering. Madame Ma repeatedly hit Pang Xiao's back with her shoes. Although there was a layer of brocade lining, the sound was extremely loud and clear, making people who heard it feel pain. Madame Ma was still angry and scolded, "You little bastard, you're a big playboy with a rotten heart. You were just saying how good Miss E is and how much you like her. Now, you're humiliating her and even chasing her away. Are you still a man? Are you still a man?" As she scolded, the soles of her shoes were still mercilessly hitting him. The sturdy thousand-layer soles were indeed a sharp weapon in the family discipline. Pang Shao, who was an overlord on the battlefield, couldn't help but shrink his neck and hide to the side. However, Madame Ma grabbed his collar and couldn't move. "It's freezing outside, the sky is dark, and it's snowing. How can you be so heartless as to chase her away? How can you expect a girl like her to have the face to see others? I've taught you in vain. I didn't expect that our family would have such a bastard like you." Chapter 336. Explain. "I don't want to listen to your explanation. Now that you've grown up, you have more ideas, and your thoughts are deeper. You don't take an old woman's words to heart. You've become rich and successful, but you've lost your good character. You've become like this as an official. I'd rather you be a cook." Madame Ma threw the shoe at Pang Shao and turned her face away. "I hate people like you the most in my life. If it was a few years ago, with my temper, I would have kicked you to death. You're stronger than others." Pang Shao held one of Madame Ma's shoes. Seeing that his grandmother had finally stopped beating him, he secretly sighed in relief. "Grandmother, please calm down. This time, Sister E and I deliberately put on a show. On purpose again." Madame Ma was a little startled. Pang Shao nodded and said in a low voice, "Too many things have happened in the past 2 days. Your Majesty set a trap for me. It was Sister E who helped me think of a countermeasure that allowed me to safely get through the disaster. Not only did I not suffer any losses, but I also smoothly entered the pavilion and became a scholar of the Hall of Heroes. In my heart, I respect and pity her. How could I abandon her? It's just that something happened in her family." Pang Shao told them about the kidnapping of the family Qin. The bandits used the Qin Huaiyuan couple as hostages and forced the family Qin to send the Qin Yining to the palace for the consort selection. The Yao clan and Yao Qinggu listened with heavy expressions. They had always been thoughtful and had vaguely guessed some clues. "This is... Alas! What is this?" Madame Ma almost beat her chest and stamped her feet. She was a good granddaughter-in-law. Not to mention her appearance and character, she was also liked by Pang Shao. More importantly, she was smart and filial. She was really pleasing to the eye. Who would have thought that such a thing would happen? Sister E is a good child. She knows how to think for the family. After a moment of silence, Yao Shi touched Pang Shao's shoulder and arm that had been beaten up and said, "Don't be too upset. That's something that can't be helped. Sister E has her own difficulties. You have to think about the big picture. Dafu, you should let go of what you should." Although Pang Shao knew that his mother had good intentions, hearing Yao clan's words, his heart still felt suffocated. "Mother, it won't end between us." Pang Shao was very certain. Yao Shi said in shock, "Don't be so stubborn. With Sister Yi's looks and character, as long as she participates in the election, she will definitely be chosen. If the Emperor likes her, don't tell me you plan to be angry for her. Do you want to die?" Yao Qinggu also thought of this, and he was no longer in the mood to smoke. Madame Ma. Mother. Son's mother. Yao Qinggu and Yao clan were both shocked and raised their voices at the same time. Madame Ma looked at Pang Shao, and then looked at the fox-like father and son. She sighed, "You two have a deep mind. You have a lot of worries and think a lot. But isn't it to live a carefree life? If I had been as calculative as you guys, Would I have followed a poor boy like you, who had no ability and was so poor? Yao Qinggu touched his nose and muttered in a low voice, "Isn't it because you like to eat my cooking?" Madame Ma slammed the table, making the cups and cups clatter. "If I live with a high-ranking official, how many delicacies can't I eat?" Madame Ma grabbed Pang Zhao's collar and said, "Don't be like them. What can you do if you worry about this and that?" She lifted Pang Zhao's collar and let him sit on the edge of the kong. Madame Ma said earnestly, "Do you think a person's life is very long? In fact, it will pass in the blink of an eye. Take advantage of the fact that you have the heart and strength to fight for what you like and do your best to do what you want to do. You don't have to worry about me and your grandfather, and you don't have to worry about your mother either. Anyway, we are originally bumpkins. At worst, we can start all over again and go back to farming. It's easy to live however you want. But you have to remember that the best hunters know how to seize the opportunity. You can't use brute force, do you understand?" Pang Zhao listened to Madame Ma's words and was really touched. Pang Zhao might understand Madame Ma's logic with his brain. However, the smarter a person was, the more comprehensive his thinking was, and he would often be limited by unnecessary conditions. He was not as carefree and happy as Madame Ma. Since he followed Li Qitian to fight for the world, he gradually learned to show a mask to others. In order to climb to the top step by step and to protect himself, Pang Zhao had to carefully think about everything he did. That was how he got his current status. For a person like him who had always been self-disciplined and suppressed himself, what he lacked was Madame Ma's happiness. Pang Zhao's eyes were bright, and he nodded hard. "Grandma, I understand what you mean. In fact, Sister Eve deliberately went out this time in order to solve the matter of the consort selection." "Oh?" Madame Ma asked. "She's a girl. What can she do?" "It's not good for me to take the lead in this matter. Because of your Majesty's relationship, I can only stay silent. So, Sister Yi has to be the one to take the lead." Pang Zhao sighed and shook his head. "In short, no matter what you hear tomorrow, don't worry. Sister Yi and I have a good relationship. Everything we do now is for the two of us to be together in the future." Madame Ma nodded. When she thought that her granddaughter-in-law didn't need to be replaced, she felt much better. Yao Qinggu and Yao Clan thought a lot at once. But looking at Pang Zhao's appearance, they didn't say anything. However, both father and daughter felt that things wouldn't end so easily. If Qin Yining wanted to reject the consort selection openly and not serve His Majesty, he had to do something big. And the development of the situation was just as they had expected. The next afternoon, when Yao Clan was talking with Madame Ma, a little girl outside the door rushed in and said, Madame Dowager, something bad happened." "What's wrong? Why are you so flustered?" Yao Clan frowned. The little girl said anxiously, "The young lady of the family Qin went to the yamen of Shantian Prefecture to sue Wang Yi. Because of the serious matter and Wang Yi's noble status, Shantian Prefecture didn't accept it. That Miss Qin actually went to the yamen to sue His Majesty." "What?" Madame Ma opened her mouth wide in shock. Even if Pang Zhao had told her not to worry no matter what she heard yesterday, the matter was already in front of Your Majesty. How could it be a small matter? What's Yi Yining thinking? Our Dai Fu has just entered the cabinet and his situation has just improved a little. He can't wait to avoid trouble. Why did he go to cause trouble?" Yao Clan was much calmer than Madame Ma. He held Madame Ma's hand and said, "Mother, don't worry." Then he ordered the maidservant, "Find out where old master is and ask him to come back as soon as possible. Also, is Wang Yi in the mansion now? If he is, ask him to come. Go quickly." "Yes." The maidservants also knew that the matter was serious and hurriedly went to find him. Not long after, Yao Qinggu came back. But Pang Shao was not at home. He said that your majesty had just sent someone to the palace. Quickly ask Mr. Su and Mr. Xia to come. Yao Clan was also anxious. Yao Qinggu, on the other hand, smoked his cigarette calmly and said, "Calm down, all of you. Nothing will happen. You damned old man, you're still smoking at this time. You're choking me to death." Madame Ma usually didn't like Yao Qinggu to smoke, but she had never restrained him. Today, she was really too anxious. In her agitation, she snatched the brass tobacco pipe and soaked the freshly lit tobacco in the tea bowl. "Oh, you!" Sigh. Yao Qinggu couldn't save her in time. He stretched his neck and looked at his precious tobacco pipe that had been extinguished in the tea bowl. In the end, he didn't dare to reignite his passion. "Tell me, what's going on? I'm confused." Elas went to Suor Dai Fu. Last night, Dai Fu confidently said that Elas was doing it for their future, but didn't she take the initiative to show her face to your majesty? Yao Qinggu said sullenly, "You can't even figure this out. Let me ask you, how did Elas come to our house? Isn't it because Dai Fu brought her back that day?" No, to outsiders, it was said that Dai Fu snatched Elas back. Then it settled. Dai Fu snatched Lassie back. Although the two of them were innocent, it was hard to say what the people outside would say when they saw it. Elas took advantage of this point. How can a girl in the consort selection have a stain? Wouldn't that be disloyal to your majesty? Ah. Madame Ma said in shock, but in that case, Elas's reputation. Yao Qinggu slowly took the tobacco pouch and pot out of the teacup, and gently wiped it with a cloth as if it was a treasure. Ever since she came to the capital and was brought back by our Dai Fu, the so-called reputation has probably been ignored. Elas went to complain to your majesty about our Dai Fu. In my opinion, it's a good thing. Not only can it straighten her reputation, but it can also let your majesty see with his own eyes that the family Qin is not on good terms with our family. It can also give your majesty a handle on our Dai Fu so that he can be more at ease when using people. Old master is very right. Su Weiji and Xiaoyu, who were led in by the Yao clan's trusted maidservants, walked to the door and happened to hear Yao Qinggu's analysis. They said in admiration, "That's indeed the case." The two of them came forward and bowed. Yao Qinggu and Madame Ma didn't put on airs. They politely asked the servants to put tea and snacks on the chairs and politely asked the two of them to sit down. Madame Ma sighed and said, "Gentlemen, please don't laugh at me. I'm also anxious about Wang Ye's safety. The affairs of the imperial court are complicated. As a woman, I don't know so much. I just want to ask you two gentlemen, is Wang Yi okay this time?" Su Weiji stood up and bowed with his hands folded. He said, "Old madam, whether this matter succeeds or not depends on Miss Qin's performance in front of your majesty. If she performs well, Wang Yi will not only be fine this time, but also make your majesty let down his guard. Although outsiders will see a joke, it will do no harm to Wang Yi." "Is that so?" Madame Ma couldn't help but worry about Qin Yining again. That girl is still young. I don't know if she can keep her composure. While the family gathered together and waited anxiously, Qin Yining had been personally led into the palace by the chief eunuch of Li Qiqian, Li Guanwen. This was the first time that Qin Yining had entered the imperial palace of Dezhou. This palace was renovated based on the original palace of Beiji State. Under the simplicity and magnificence, it revealed the unique luxury and majesty of the royal family. Chapter 337. Along the way, Li Guanwen appeared to be looking straight ahead, but in reality, he was secretly sizing up the woman beside him. He had some thoughts in his mind. It was no wonder that when the Empress heard the news of the Qin clan's complaint, she didn't care about the anxiety of her father being imprisoned and even sent her most capable servant to investigate. If this girl entered the palace, her appearance alone would be top-notch among the noble masters. If she was a bit shrewd, then her future would be limitless. Li Guanwen's attitude towards Qin Yining became more and more cautious. As a small eunuch who had been bullied in his early years, Li Guanwen deeply understood the principle of "don't bully a poor youth." When he was going up the stairs, he didn't forget to remind Qin Yining, "Miss Qin, please wait outside the hall for a moment. Allow me to report to your majesty." "Yes, thank you for your trouble." Qin Yining returned a polite smile. Li Guanwen saw that her attitude was neither servile nor overbearing. She was polite and didn't lose her composure. Thinking that she came here to complain to the emperor, and to complain to the fierce Prince Zhongshuan, how could this kind of woman be an ordinary person? In his heart, he regarded her even more highly. Li Guanwen went in to reply, and then came out to invite Qin Yining in after a while. Qin Yining looked calm on the surface, but she was extremely nervous on the inside. Li Qitian was different from the two emperors of Great Yen. He was a shrewd man, and a man who was able to force Pang Shao, an extremely intelligent man, to not act rashly. So, how could he be someone easy to deal with? To tell the truth, she was very nervous. But since she had already chosen this method, she couldn't turn back. The imperial study was very spacious. The floor was covered with shiny black marble tiles. There were no treasures on the treasure pavilion, only books. In the bookcase behind the black lacquered bookcase, there were collections of classics and history arranged in different categories. Li Qitian, wearing a new bright yellow uniform, was sitting behind the desk. His index finger, which wore a jade ring, was tapping on the table. The sound was extremely crisp in the empty room. "Greetings to your majesty. Long live your majesty. You may rise." Li Qitian's voice was particularly amiable. "Thank you, your majesty." Qin Yining bowed again, then stood up and lowered his head. She had specially learned the rules of enrich from Mammy Jean. Her bearing and demeanor were elegant, even more pleasing to the eye than the real princess of Li Helan. Li Qitian sat upright in his original position, sizing her up without leaving a trace. He thought to himself, in the end, even a hero has a weakness for the charms of a beautiful woman. No wonder Dao Niu Ji she couldn't help but love and hate this woman, and couldn't forget her. Li Qitian's voice became even more amiable. "This is the first time someone has sounded the drum of hearing since I stepped on the throne. What surprised me even more was that the person who had the courage to sound the drum of hearing to complain was actually a little girl like you. Qin clan, what great injustice have you suffered? If it's not a small matter, I will punish you for making a fuss over nothing and making fun of me." Although Li Qitian's attitude was gentle, the meaning behind his words was not. In addition, Qin Yining had some understanding of Li Qitian's methods. When faced with such a shrewd emperor, the pressure she felt was so strong that it was as if it could turn into a vine and wrap around her body. Qin Yining took a deep breath and calmly said, "Replying to your majesty, this subject's daughter does not dare to act rashly. This subject's daughter truly has suffered a great injustice. This subject's daughter accompanied my father and traveled thousands of miles to seek refuge with your majesty. Because your majesty is a sage emperor, and because the imperial court of Dezhou accepts people from all walks of life, my father finally has a place to use his talents." Everyone in the family was very happy. "We only thought that once we came to Dezhou, my father would have a wise emperor to pledge his loyalty to, and this subject's daughter would also be able to live a stable and prosperous life in the capital. Who would have thought that not only would we be robbed by bandits on the road and lose our parents, but this subject's daughter would also be kidnapped by evil people as soon as she entered the city." At this point, Qin Yining's beautiful eyes were already filled with tears. However, she stubbornly refused to let her tears fall. She angrily and humiliatingly said, Prince Zhongshuan disregarded this subject's daughter's wishes and forcibly took this subject's daughter into his mansion. His intentions were evil. This subject's daughter was alone and had no other choice. Yesterday, Prince Zhongshuan said that he was tired of this subject's daughter and drove this subject's daughter out of his mansion at night. Qin Yining's tears finally fell. She knelt down and kowtowed as she said, In the presence of your majesty, Prince Zhongshuan actually did such a lawless thing. I beg your majesty to uphold justice for this subject's daughter and severely punish this evil person. Listening to her tearful complaints, Li Qitian raised his eyebrows in surprise. Everyone in the city knew that she had been forcibly taken back by Pang Xiao, and he knew more than ordinary people. He had also suspected the relationship between Pang Xiao and Qin Yining. However, based on the spies' reports, it seemed that Pang Xiao loved and hated her at the same time. He didn't expect that a person with self-control like Pang Xiao would be able to drive people out of his mansion in a fit of anger. Li Qitian was amused by this lively show and felt extremely relaxed. However, he still had a dignified expression on his face. Something like this actually happened? He stood up in surprise and paced back and forth with his hands behind his back as he said, This emperor didn't know this would happen. This subject's daughter was locked up in the mansion and suffered a lot. If it wasn't for the fact that this subject's daughter wanted your majesty to uphold justice for this subject's daughter would have died a long time ago. Today, this subject's daughter finally escaped from the tiger's den. This subject's daughter earnestly asks your majesty to uphold justice for this subject's daughter. Qin Yining repeatedly kowtowed. Li Qitian was happy in his heart, but he said with a serious expression, Your one-sided story isn't enough to win my trust. How about this? This emperor summons Prince Zhongshuan into the palace. You can confront him face to face. If this matter is confirmed, this emperor will punish him for you. How about it? Qin Yining instantly understood. Li Qitian wanted to see Pang Xiao make a fool of himself. Such a vile person, really. Qin Yining was angry in her heart, but she had to admit that this was the effect she wanted. This subject's daughter is speaking the truth. I'm not afraid of confrontation. This subject's daughter is willing to confront evil people. Qin Yining said in an excited voice. Li Qitian nodded and smiled as he ordered Li Guanwen to summon Pang Xiao into the palace. He also ordered a small eunuch to bring Qin Yining a chair and serve her tea and snacks. Qin Yining cautiously sat sideways on the chair and waited anxiously with her head lowered. Not long after, Pang Xiao rushed over and was led into the imperial study by Li Guanwen. When Qin Yining heard the footsteps, she suddenly raised her head and met Pang Xiao's eyes. A trace of astonishment flashed across Pang Xiao's face, but it was quickly followed by anger and embarrassment. Qin Yining's eyes were red with hatred, but because the emperor was present, she could only suppress her anger. Li Qitian observed the two of them without leaving a trace, and he was about to burst into laughter. Younger brother, do you know why this emperor is looking for you today? Pang Xiao bowed to Li Qitian, then cupped his hands and said, Replying to your majesty, this subject doesn't know. You don't know. Li Qitian smiled and said, This emperor thought that you would naturally understand what was going on after seeing Miss Family Qin. Let this emperor ask you, did you force her into the palace to humiliate her? Chapter 338. Qin Yining's eyes suddenly widened. He was so angry that his lips trembled and he couldn't say a word. Li Qitian asked with interest, Oh. You didn't take her by force? Indeed, I didn't. Pang Xiao said confidently, she gave herself to me of her own accord. You. Qin Yining was so angry that he couldn't say a complete sentence. His tears fell like beads from a broken necklace. He choked with sobs like an injured little animal. You've gone too far. Pang Xiao proudly straightened his back and only glanced at Qin Yining from the corner of his eyes. It was as if he was a lowly ant in the dust, not worthy of his attention at all. His angular and handsome face was even colder because of his disdain. The mocking curve of his lips was enough to make people fall into the abyss of eternal damnation. Qin Yining's body trembled like a leaf destroyed by a storm. He looked really pitiful. Li Qitian coughed and glanced at Pang Xiao mockingly. Pang Xiao seemed to feel something. He turned to look at Li Qitian. Pity and hatred flashed in his eyes before they could be cleaned up. Noticing Li Qitian's gaze, Pang Xiao coughed awkwardly to cover up his embarrassment. Li Qitian looked at the two of them. He was in a good mood, as if he had drunk a bowl of hot soup on a cold day. It was more interesting than watching the story of the thorn and hairpin. He could see that Pang Xiao still had a trace of pity for Qin Yining. Unfortunately, his pity couldn't overcome the hatred of his father's murder. In this way, he could use the family Qin people to check and balance the imperial court without worry. He didn't have to worry about Pang Xiao and the family Qin working together. With tears in his eyes, Qin Yining knelt down and said, "I beg your majesty to uphold justice," but he dared to deny it to my face and even made false accusations. This subject's daughter did not take the initiative. Any woman would be unable to restrain their shyness when such words were spoken. Qin Yining's face was as red as the sunset. Li Qitian, on the other hand, could not possibly punish Pang Xiao severely at this time. Now, in the cabinet, only Pang Xiao was his confidant. In the future, he would need Pang Xiao's help. Li Qitian would not let Pang Xiao's reputation be tarnished. Although Pang Xiao's behavior of snatching people that day was well known, he was still biased at this moment. Moreover, if a man took a fancy to a girl who was the daughter of his enemy, if he didn't snatch her by force, was he supposed to go through the 3 matchmakers and 6 betrothal ceremonies? However, he couldn't say this to Qin Yining. After all, Qin Yining was Qin Huayuan's daughter. If he blindly favored her and neglected her, it wouldn't look good. Li Qitian could only say, "We will carefully investigate this matter. You may withdraw." Qin Yining raised her head while choking with sobs. Her beautiful eyes flashed with grief and grief. However, she also knew that in front of the emperor, she couldn't be willful. Thus, she could only bow obediently. This subject's daughter will withdraw. Li Guanwen led Qin Yining out of the imperial study. Pang Xiao couldn't help but turn around to look at her back. It wasn't until the doors of the hall were closed and the cold air outside that Pang Xiao came back to his senses. When he suddenly saw Li Qitian's teasing smile, Pang Xiao awkwardly said, "Your Majesty. What are you looking at?" "Younger brother, even heroes have a weakness for beauties." Only the two of them were left in the hall. When Li Qitian spoke, his tone was much more intimate. "Don't blame us for not reminding you. That little beauty is a thorny rose. You should be careful not to prick yourself. Although you like her, you can play with her as a plaything. However, don't fall too deeply into her trap. Don't forget what happened to General Yun that day. In short, what kind of woman can't we brothers want? Younger brother, you should also think about your own reputation. Don't let others have something to talk about." Li Qitian's words seemed to have no clue, but the most obvious provocation was very clear. Pang Xiao's heart was as clear as a mirror. He nodded in agreement without batting an eyelid and said with hatred, "How could this subject really do anything to her? The hatred of my father's murder is absolutely irreconcilable. When this subject cut those people into pieces, it wasn't enough to avenge my father's death. The main culprit hasn't been eliminated yet." Li Qitian heard this and fell silent. If Pang Xiao wanted to openly fight with Qin Huayuan, the balance of his plan would be broken. This was the situation that Li Qitian didn't want to see the most. Moreover, Qin Huayuan was a truly talented person. Li Qitian also had some affection for him. It seemed that his provocation just now had gone too far. When Pang Xiao saw Li Qitian's expression, other than understanding, there wasn't any other fluctuation in his heart. He had already seen through this brother Li Qitian. However, on the surface, Pang Xiao still acted as if he was conflicted and helpless. In the end, he said considerately, "This subject knows that your majesty loves talented people. That Qin Meng really does have some ability. This subject is willing to consider your majesty's thoughts. This subject will definitely not have any discord with Qin Meng. Of course, this is on the premise that they don't take the initiative to provoke this subject." Li Qitian received Pang Xiao's promise and nodded with great satisfaction. Now that you have a reputation, how would they dare to act rashly in front of you? However, the Qin family has already arrived in the capital, but Qin Meng still hasn't been found. The people we sent to search for him also returned with no news of Qin Meng's whereabouts. This is truly a headache. Could it be that Qin Meng met with some accident? It was another test. Pang Xiao said, perhaps he got separated and lost his way. Or perhaps the heavens knew that he had sinned deeply and punished him on behalf of this subject. Although Pang Xiao's words made Li Qitian unhappy, in the end, it allowed him to confirm that the Qin family and the Pang family were not on good terms. Li Qitian didn't want to dwell on this matter anymore. Therefore, he and Pang Xiao began to discuss the affairs of the imperial court after entering the pavilion. At this time, Qin Yining was led by Li Guanwen to the side hall. She washed her face, applied some lotion, and rearranged her hair. Qin Yining secretly thought that the people in the palace were really attentive. To be able to receive the care of the head eunuch Li Guanwen, her attitude was extremely cautious. Li Guanwen intended to be kind to her. Therefore, the two of them were very polite and didn't have any ill feelings towards each other. Qin Yining finished tidying up, got on the small oil cart, and left under the escort of a young eunuch. The inside of the cart was slightly cold, which was just enough for Qin Yining to calm down. Who would have thought that the slowly moving oil cart would suddenly stop? Qin Yining asked doubtfully, "What's wrong?" No one answered from outside the cart. Qin Yining's heart suddenly became alert. Just as he was about to lift the curtain to take a look, the curtain was lifted from the outside. Standing in front of the cart were two young women dressed in luxurious clothes. One of them was dignified and noble, dressed in red. She was the Anyang Grand Princess, whom Qin Yining had met once before. Standing next to her was a very beautiful young woman in the prime of her life. The young woman was of medium height and had a plump figure. She wore a cloak with a red fox fur collar and a sleeping rabbit with a ruby of the same color. Her makeup was exquisite, and her red lips were lustrous and moist. Standing next to Li Helan, even though she was a bit older, she still suppressed the Grand Princess's elegance. Among the noble women in the capital, who could stand next to the Anyang Grand Princess and walk around the palace? At this time, Li Helan smiled and said, "Miss Qin, please don't blame us. It's just that it's rare to see a woman of the same age in the palace. Sister Lu and I have nothing to do. When we heard that Miss Qin entered the palace, we especially came to see you." Chapter 339. The curiosity in the eyes of the young woman surnamed Lu was very straightforward. She did not hide her invasive gaze at all. The arrogant aura around her body was even stronger than that of the Grand Princess Li Helan. From her current expression, it could be seen that this woman was a proud daughter of heaven who was born with a golden spoon in her mouth. It was likely that she had never experienced any disappointment in her life. While she was thinking, Qin Yining had already gotten off the carriage and bowed to the two. As the eldest princess, Li Helan naturally received Qin Yining's bow. But the young woman did not react at all. She did not return the bow and only raised her chin, casually looking at Qin Yining. I have long heard that the young miss of the Qin family is very beautiful. Seeing you today, even I can't compare to you. It really is. Her red lips smacked, unable to find the right words to describe her. She did not feel embarrassed and smiled faintly. Then, as if she was doing a favor, she said, "You can call me Madame Lu." She really was a woman of high status in her maternal family. Otherwise, when a married woman was called a madam, she would have to use her husband's surname. Qin Yining lowered her eyes and said, "Madame Lu." Madame Lu seemed to be very satisfied with Qin Yining's obedience. She glanced at her simple dress again and gave a disdainful smile. It's no wonder that the eldest princess of Anyang praised you like a fairy in front of me. She is used to exaggerating. She even praised me as a celestial being. I thought I would meet a village girl today. I never expected that there would really be someone like you in this world. Even the simple clothes and hairpin could not hide your beauty. I can see that when you were in Great Yen, when your father was in a high position, you must have been a magnificent woman. Too bad, I don't have the chance to see that face of yours. Qin Yining looked at Madame Lu in surprise. She was sure that this was the first time she had met her, but why was her words full of sarcasm? Her last sentence even implied that she was cursing the Qin family to never be able to make a comeback. This kind of way of speaking was really unpleasant to the extreme. Perhaps Madame Lu was familiar with the eldest princess of Anyang, so she was speaking up for the eldest princess. However, this was still an important place in the palace. Qin Yining's status couldn't be compared to the two people in front of him, so he didn't dare to stay here for long. Since the conversation wasn't pleasant, Qin Yining wasn't someone who would stand there and let others bully him. Therefore, Qin Yining said goodbye politely and courteously. Li Helan smiled and said, "All right, then we can meet again next time." "Thank you very much, Princess Royal." Qin Yining bowed and then got back into the oil wall carriage. Li Helan and Mrs. Lu dodged to the side. It wasn't until the carriage was far away that Madame Lu said, "The eldest princess also has times when she makes mistakes. From what I can see, this Qin girl is an extremely well-behaved girl. She's so soft that it's hard to even pinch her." Li Helan raised her eyebrows and smiled warmly, "Perhaps I really misjudged you. However, Ben Gong is thinking that to be able to make such a heroic man like Brother Xiao fall head over heels for her, she naturally has some outstanding aspects." "Oh." Madame Lu seemed to be interested and her eyes flashed with interest. "I've heard rumors that Prince Zhongshuan forcefully took the Qin girl into the palace. It seems like there really is such a thing." "Yes, there is such a thing. I went to the palace a few days ago and even saw her." "Then what is Wang Ye's attitude towards her?" Madame Lu's tone was a bit anxious. Li Helan smiled and said, "It's not like you don't know Brother Xiao's personality. However, I can see that Brother Xiao is special to her. Presumably, Prince Zhongshuan is a man who clearly distinguishes between love and hate. He must be thinking of a way to avenge his father's death." Madame Lu's cheeks flushed red and her red lips opened slightly. "To tell you the truth, my late husband and Prince Zhongshuan can be considered old friends. I have also met him a few times. He is a truly unyielding hero and would not necessarily be infatuated with a little girl." Li Helan smiled and said, "If Madame says so, then so be it. However, Ben Gong and Brother Xiao can be considered to have grown up together and are most familiar with each other. Since we were young, Ben Gong has never seen Brother Xiao so attentive to any girl." Madame Lu was displeased by the intimate way Li Helan addressed Pang Xiao and lost her patience. "In any case, the eldest princess has already been betrothed to someone else. In any case, the eldest princess has called me Jijia for so long, so I will just say a few words. You are already engaged to Marquis Dingbei and will be the Ji family's wife in the future. However, when you mention Prince Zhongshuan, you keep saying Brother Xiao this and Brother Xiao that. What do you think Marquis Dingbei will think? Or could it be that the eldest princess is actually unwilling to give up on Prince Zhongshuan? The last sentence was frivolous and Madame Lu even used her bright red nail to lightly tap Li Helan's bright red cheeks. Li Helan thought of this marriage that she was dissatisfied with and thought of the person she was longing for. Her mood became even more unhappy and she couldn't help but retort sarcastically. There is no need to trouble Jijia Lu to worry about Ben Gong's matters. I heard that there are 2 new male companions in the Fu and they are twins. Although their appearances are equally handsome, their tempers are not good and they are unwilling to properly serve Jijia Lu. Jijia Lu should be more concerned about the matters in your own room. When the matter of privately raising male companions was mentioned, Madame Lu did not feel the slightest bit ashamed. Instead, she nodded and said, "This man no matter what he looks like, isn't it all the same when he enters the room? It only depends on whether his body is strong or not. The new twin brothers are young and too inexperienced. They are too embarrassed to serve others, so it is very boring. They need to be trained before they can be used." No matter how bold and unrestrained Li Helan was, she was still an unmarried girl. Hearing Madame Lu's words, she couldn't help blushing. Her heart was both shy and complicated. However, Li Helan never forgot her goal. Hearing Jijia Lu say it like this, it is also the case. How many people in this world can be as heroic and strong as Xiao Gij? Such a well-rounded person, if he were to marry in the future, I really don't know what kind of woman he would be matched with. Li Helan's words were filled with yearning. Madame Lu thought of Pang Zhao's appearance and felt her heart itch for a moment. It was a pity that she had once invited Pang Zhao to have sex with her, but that person was dismissive of her and made her lose face. From then on, she no longer wanted to find Pang Zhao. She thought about how Pang Zhao had forcefully taken the girl from the Qin clan back to the residence. Even if Pang Zhao had humiliated her for the sake of revenge, the rice must have been cooked long ago. Such a good thing had actually happened to Qin Wanru. She had sincerely invited him, but he had rejected her. Madame Lu snorted and left unhappily without even saying goodbye to Li Helan. Li Helan looked at Madame Lu's back and sneered. She secretly cursed her for being a slut before turning back to the Palace of Peace and Tranquility. On the other hand, Qin Yining left the palace in a carriage and did not immediately return to the guest house. Instead, he sat in the carriage with Bing Tang and waited in a quiet alley not far from the palace. Ji Yun was sent to see if Pang Zhao had come out. After waiting for a full 2 hours, Pang Zhao finally left the palace and was led to the carriage by Ji Yun. Chapter 340. When he came in, there was a gust of cold air. Qin Yining was caught off guard and took a deep breath. Her throat felt itchy and she couldn't help but cough twice. Pang Zhao quickly put down the curtain and said nervously, "Did you catch a cold yesterday?" His large hand touched Qin Yining's forehead. Seeing that she didn't have a fever, he let out a sigh of relief. The weather in the capital is cold. How can you adapt when you just arrived? In the winter in the north, a drop of water will turn into ice. It's more convenient for you to stay in the Wang Fu instead of staying in the guest house. Pang Zhao shook his head and looked annoyed. If I knew it would be like this, I wouldn't have cooperated with you to act. So what if I keep you in the Fu? When Pang Zhao was speaking, Bing Tang had already gotten off the carriage and walked away with Ji Yun and the driver. At this time, Pang Zhao dared to take Qin Yining into his arms without any scruples. He opened his cloak and wrapped it around her, like a big kangaroo wrapped around a small kangaroo. How about you come back with me, okay? Qin Yining snuggled into his arms and said angrily, "You're talking nonsense again. How can I go back with you now? The people outside already know that I'm going to participate in the election. I believe that this news will soon reach your Majesty's ears. If he knows that you know I'm going to participate in the election and still forcefully hold on to me, what will he think of you? Pang Xiao chuckled and said indifferently, if I don't hold on to you, will he easily let me go and not be afraid of me anymore? At least he won't be able to find anything that can be used against you. Qin Yining said seriously, I don't want to be used against you. In the dimly lit carriage, her black gem-like eyes were dazzling and deep enough to make people sink into them. Pang Xiao couldn't help but lean forward and gently kiss her eyes. When she suddenly closed her eyes, her long eyelashes brushed against his lips and tickled his heart unbearably. The light kisses fell bit by bit and finally moved to her lips. Pang Xiao delicately used the tip of his tongue to trace the shape of her lips and gently kissed her. His deep voice became a bit hoarse. How are you my weakness? You're my motivation. It was because of her that he had the determination to persevere, and it was because of her that he had the courage to fight against fate. Otherwise, when he felt tired in the situation, Pang Xiao really didn't know why he was persevering and didn't know how much longer he could persevere. Hiss and s of his scalpses. And s. It wasn't until Qin Yining was out of breath and pounded his shoulder with her soft fists that Pang Xiao let go of her hand reluctantly. He licked her bright red lips again and said, Sister Yi, when the situation stabilizes, I will go to your house to propose marriage. Of course, Qin Yining knew that this man was agitated because of love. That was why he said those words without thinking. She did not doubt Pang Xiao's sincerity towards her. However, she also understood the situation in the court. They were not allowed to freely decide their own future. Right now, they could only take one step at a time. It's still too early to talk about marriage. Even if you want to propose marriage, my father must come back safely. Qin Yining looked worried. He lowered his eyes and said, I don't know if the kidnappers will harm my parents after I caused such a big commotion and refused to enter the palace. If she made a wrong judgment this time, wouldn't her parents be harmed? She did not want her family to be in a dilemma because of the struggle. However, she was even more unwilling to put her parents in danger. Pang Xiao held Qin Yining in his arms and comforted her. Since they met, she had never had a peaceful day. When Pang Xiao was young, he had been living alone in the mountains. When he returned home, he had been scheming for the sake of his life. As a result, Pang Xiao thought about it carefully and realized that his beloved Xiang Yi had to work 10 times harder than others to get what she wanted. However, she had never given up fighting or blamed others. He really cherished her to the bone because she was so sensible and tenacious. Don't worry. I have already sent people to investigate what happened that day. They will definitely find the whereabouts of father-in-law and mother-in-law as soon as possible. Don't worry too much. After all, your body is damaged. You have to recuperate well. I know. With you here, I don't have to worry. Qin Yining nestled on Pang Xiao's shoulder obediently. His voice was soft and sweet. Now that we are in your territory, everything depends on you, young Master Yao. Pang Xiao couldn't help but chuckle at the last 3 words of a joke. She recalled all the things that had happened when they first met, and then looked at today. Although not much time had passed, their feelings for each other were already so deep. Just thinking about it made Pang Xiao's heart fill with sweetness. The two whispered for a while before Pang Xiao got off the carriage. He called Bing Tang over. With his back facing Qin Yining, he took out a stack of banknotes from his sleeve and gave it to her. Your miss is with the Qin family. It is inconvenient everywhere. You have to be careful. Take good care of her and help her recuperate. Bing Tang smiled and helped Qin Yining put away the family support fee. She smiled and said, Wang Yi, don't worry. If there is something we can't handle, even if Miss doesn't want to say it, this servant will definitely tell Wang Yi. When Pang Xiao saw Bing Tang being so tactful, he could not help but smile and praise her. After the two said goodbye, Qin Yining got on the carriage with Bing Tang and Ji Yun. Or was she crying because the family gave up their wealth? Or was she crying because Qin Huayuan was still missing? The three of them talked and entered the door one after the other. Qin Yining took off his cold outer robe outside the screen. He felt warm air wrap around his body and was about to go to the side hall. Who knew that as soon as he took a step, he would hear Han's second young mistress's voice. Although you say that, entering the palace to serve the emperor is still a good thing. Since fourth sister can't be chosen, then the opportunity should be given to the other sisters. If this matter is made public, won't our family lose this opportunity? Second old master and third old master coaxed old madam with great difficulty, but Han's second young mistress's words pulled old madam back from her disappointment. Old madam cried again. Qin Han, who had entered the door with Qin Yining, saw Han's second young mistress's appearance and immediately became angry. He angrily scolded, "What are you talking about? You are pregnant, so you should take care of yourself. Don't talk nonsense and pretend to know when you don't know." Han's second young mistress was scolded until her face turned red. She was too embarrassed to raise her head. Second old master saw that Qin Han was willing to give Han's second young mistress face in front of everyone and felt much better. Second old master said, "Mother, don't worry. Didn't your son tell you the reason just now? Our family has just arrived here. As long as we pass our days peacefully and slowly recuperate, we will be able to revive the family. But once we get involved in this matter, if we don't handle it well, we will be stuck between your majesty and Wang Yi. Our family hasn't established a firm foothold in Dezhou yet, so how can we act rashly? Mother, for the good of the family, we also know that we can think of other ways to earn money to support the family. But we can't take the initiative to get involved when we know that your majesty and Prince Zhongshuan have disagreements." Second old master had already talked until his mouth was dry and his tongue was dry. He had no patience. They were both D's sons and he was also the flesh that fell from old madam's body. But with Qin Huayuan by her side, old madam's heart had already been biased to no end. He even thought that if Qin Huayuan was here, it would be much easier to persuade old madam. Thinking about the missing Qin Huayuan, second old master also felt heavy. He let out a long sigh. The whole room was so silent that you could hear a pin drop. The atmosphere was very heavy. Chapter 341. Eighth young lady was cheerful and honest. She had never thought about entering the palace. Instead, she felt that the palace was very scary. When she heard old madam's words, she naturally nodded in agreement. Qin Huaining, on the other hand, lowered her head and remained quiet and obedient without saying a word. She wasn't willing to let go of this opportunity, but what could she do? Your Majesty was high and mighty. Even if she wanted to do something, it was useless. Your Majesty had to choose a woman through the family's connections to participate in the selection. She couldn't bypass the family Qin and participate in the selection herself. Anyway, she was just an adopted daughter and didn't have a proper noble birth. If there was anything in the family, they had to think about Qin Yining and Qin Baoning first. It wouldn't be her turn. In just one night, the news of Qin Yining's accusation spread throughout the capital. No one knew who secretly added fuel to the fire, but the details of how Qin Yining was kidnapped and abused by Prince Zhongshuan were described vividly. It was as if they were the spirits behind the scenes to be able to see it so clearly. The message spread from 1 to 10, and from 10 to 100. Who in the upper-class circle didn't know that the family Qin's daughter was kidnapped by Prince Zhongshuan? When they thought of how Prince Zhongshuan had killed and framed Pang Zhongjing's old officials when he first entered Beiji, everyone felt deep sympathy for Miss Family Qin. However, Qin Huaiyuan had used the scheme of sowing discord to harm Pang Zhongjing. It was natural for a daughter to repay a father's debt. Qin Yining's name card was naturally returned, and her participation in the election was completely over. Qin Yining took Lian Xiaozhou and her trusted maidservants with her all day long. Every day, except for going to old Madam early in the morning to complete the etiquette, she spent the rest of the time doing needlework in her room. She rarely came out. When Second Foreign heard that Qin Yining took her maidservant to do needlework all day, she praised her several times in front of old Madam. "Sister Yi, you're a sensible girl after all. Now that we don't have any money for ourselves, we can only stay in the guest house. Although this place takes care of our food and lodging, we're a family. What if we want to buy something? I can't ask your Majesty in Dezhou for money either. I see that Sister Yi is now working with the maidservants. Presumably, she wants to supplement the family's income." Old Madam's heart ached when she heard that. Although there were many things that Qin Yining didn't do to her liking, she had to admit that she had a good view of the overall situation. Old Madam then called upon the womenfolk in the family to do needlework together. Qin Huaining and 8th young Miss stayed by Old Madam's side every day. Qin Huaining carefully catered to her, while 8th young Miss had no one to rely on because she had lost her birth mother and mother. The two of them were extremely filial to Old Madam. With the rebellious and unruly Qin Yining as a comparison, in addition to the fact that Old Madam and Qin Huaining had raised her for more than 10 years, and 8th young Miss was innocent and obedient, the two of them were very liked by Old Madam. However, Qin Yining became the most disliked of the three granddaughters. Qin Yining didn't care about this at all. As usual, she returned to her room after saluting every day. Occasionally, one day, she would hear a little maidservant by second young Mistress Han's side and a maidservant by second foreign side complaining. "There aren't many people left in our family. Only 4th young Miss is pampered. She actually needs 5 maidservants to serve her. Qin Fu isn't as rich as before. How can she be so arrogant? Even our foreign doesn't have that many servants by her side. That's right. Our second young mistress only has me and Xiao Tao as her personal attendants." Qin Yining stopped in her tracks and held Lian Xiaozhou's hand. She turned her head to look at the two maidservants who had their backs facing her. She lightly laughed and said, "Escaping from disaster all the way, those who survive are all lucky. The maidservants by my side have always been very lucky. Naturally, they will all live to be 100 years old. However, good luck also has a time when it runs out. Don't get too carried away and turn good luck into bad luck." The two maidservants were startled and suddenly turned their heads. They saw Qin Yining wearing a light green embroidered cotton cloak and standing in the corridor with her maidservant. The gazes of several people looking at them were unfriendly. They had not forgotten how this 4th young Miss used to be in charge of the inner residence. The two of them kept quiet out of fear and were unable to speak. Bing Tang ridiculed, "This family has already lost all their money and is now eating food from the government. They haven't touched anyone's money, yet there are still people gossiping. In the future, if they can't stay in the guest house and have to go out, they will have to rely on my master and young miss. There are still people who don't know life from death. Could it be that they won't eat when the time comes? Isn't that so?" Ji Yun sneered and said, "They really don't have any rules." The two maidservants were so scared that they didn't dare raise their heads. They stood there like quails. Qin Yining did not have any interest in reaching out to the second foreign and Han's second young mistress. She also didn't care as she left with her people. The two maidservants watched as Qin Yining walked away without any intention of dealing with them. Only then did they let out a long sigh of relief. After another 10 days, the Anyang eldest princess and Marquis North pacifying Ji Ziyu's wedding was approaching. The capital became lively. Pang Xiao was Ji Ziyu's sworn brother and naturally had to help out. He was so busy that he only had time to secretly watch Qin eating a few times. After eating the laba congee, on the 10th day of the 12th lunar month, a grand wedding shook the capital. Although the family Qin stayed in the guest house, they could hear the sounds of firecrackers and the heated discussions of the people. There were also curious maidservants who secretly went to watch. When they came back, they vividly described the event. In summary, it could be summed up in one sentence: the imperial family was marrying off their daughter and the marquis was marrying. Outsiders could only see the grandeur of the wedding. Only the bride and groom knew their own feelings. Li Helan didn't know how many times she cried. When she saw Pang Xiao accompanying Ji Ziyu at the princess residence, she almost shed tears on the spot. Ji Ziyu was expressionless the entire time. His handsome face was like an ice sculpture. He didn't look like he was marrying, but more like he was attending a funeral. No one dared to slander Marquis North pacifying for being dissatisfied with this marriage. They only dared to talk about Marquis North pacifying's personality. He was too honest and too serious. On the second day of the wedding, Pang Xiao and Ji Ziyu had arranged to eat wine at the prince's residence. Both of them drank until they were dead drunk. Ji Ziyu didn't even return to the prince consort's residence and directly stayed in the prince's residence. When they returned home, Li Helan naturally had to be shy in front of Li Qitian and obediently thank him. Ji Ziyu stayed in the imperial study to talk with Li Qitian. Li Helan went to the imperial harem. The empress fell ill because of her father's death. They only met briefly before Li Helan went to the palace of Compassionate and Peaceful. As soon as she saw the Empress Dowager, Li Helan couldn't hold back her tears. The prince consort wasn't warm to me. He only dealt with me on the wedding night. Later, I ordered a mama to go to the prince consort's residence to summon him. The servant said that the prince consort went to drink with his friends. With the prince consort's personality, how could he have friends? He must be unwilling to serve me. That's why he was so evasive. The more she thought about it, the more wronged Li Helan felt. She leaned on the Empress Dowager's knees and sobbed. Although she had been in love with Pang Xiao for a long time, Ji Ziyu was a man with military achievements. He was also handsome. He was also the man that all the women in the world flocked to. How many women could escape his occasional smile? Li Helan and Ji Ziyu became husband and wife. Naturally, she had many fantasies about him. However, Ji Ziyu was so cold to her. He didn't even kiss her in the bridal chamber. It was as if he was only doing it for the sake of Pang Xiao. Li Helan naturally couldn't say this kind of secret. However, when she thought about her marriage with Ru Yi, she felt sorry for herself. The Empress Dowager was very calm. She patted Li Helan's back to comfort her until she stopped crying. Then, she said, don't cry. I don't think that the prince consort is that kind of person. Is there some misunderstanding? Or... The Empress Dowager frowned. Her voice was a bit sharp. Or is it that you still haven't given up on Pang Zhishi and he found out? When Li Helan heard this, her heart skipped a beat. Her expression was a bit sluggish. It shouldn't be. Have you ever gone to find Pang Zhishi again? The Empress Dowager stared at her daughter sternly. Li Helan shook her head repeatedly. No. Pang Zhishi sent me back to the palace and handed me over to Imperial Brother. He spoke so bluntly. Why would I go find him? The Empress Dowager frowned. After thinking for a moment, she said, how can there be an impenetrable wall in this world? Perhaps the prince consort found out. It's just that he's used to being silent. Which man in this world isn't proud? Moreover, he's such a proud son of heaven. He's your prince consort, but you've always had someone else in your heart. How do you want the prince consort to face you? Lee Heelan's heart turned cold. She already understood a bit. However, how could she admit defeat on the surface? She straightened her neck and said, I'm a princess. He has to serve me well as a princess. When I tell him to come to the princess's residence, he has to rush over from the prince consort's residence. I don't want to see him, so he has to obediently stay in the prince consort's residence. He's not allowed to take in even a bed warmer by his side. He's here to serve me. Do you want me to accommodate him? When the Empress Dowager heard Lee Heelan's words, she angrily poked her forehead. The prince consort is not an ordinary man who lives off a woman. If you have such thoughts, then don't expect to be a happy husband and wife. In any case, you only want a servant to serve you, not a husband. Why are you still complaining about him? Lee Heelan was speechless for a moment. She knew what she wanted in her heart. She wanted Pang Zhao's love. However, now that she was married to Ji Ziyu, she really liked Ji Ziyu's handsome face. She hoped that Ji Ziyu would chase after her like a flock of ducks and be obedient to her. She didn't want Ji Ziyu to treat her so coldly. She also envied those couples who were harmonious and raised their brows. However, she was unwilling. She always thought that if she and Ji Ziyu didn't have a good life, would her imperial brother pity her? Would she and Pang Zhao still have hope? She knew that she wanted too much. Perhaps she wouldn't be able to get it at all. However, she couldn't help but think about it. The Empress Dowager looked at Lee Heelan's appearance and didn't know how to teach her. She really sighed heavily. In contrast to Lee Heelan's confusion, Qin Yining was very happy today. Because Master Zhong had finally arrived in the capital with a group of her confidants. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.